There is, however, evidence that the original hospital bombing claim, the really big one that drove media for arguably for weeks, that Israel had bombed a hospital and destroyed it and 500 plus people had died, that came straight from Hamas, and that was uncritically amplified by...
The IDF can't handle it. They're scared. They don't actually want to fight Hamas. Then what are they doing?
Why do you keep saying they're scared? First of all, you're fighting terrorists that are operating out of civilian infrastructure. These are the most cowardly ways you can ever conduct.
No, that's insane.
What's insane? What part of that was insane?
Hamas are using human shields.
I do not agree with them. No.
You do not agree?
No, I do not agree. Because look, guys, under that same logic, no matter anytime anyone attacks from their own territory that has civilians, then they're using human shields.
Israel needs to make a concerted effort towards peace. And this might mean things like you are going to have to grin and bear a couple of terror attacks because they're going to happen. And it can't be the case that every time Israel loses 3 soldiers, they go in and they kill 50 civilians. This has been the history of Israel and Palestine. Cannot be happening over and over and over again because obviously it foments hatred on both sides. They need to be willing to make some concessions, like dump some of these enclave settlements. When you start to do your land swaps, you need to be willing to offer a lot for places like Hebron, okay? You can't have these enclaves out here that destroy the contiguous state, okay? On the Palestinian side, there needs to be a hardcore de-radicalization effort. You have to acknowledge that the Palestinian people want violence. Not Hamas, not the PLO, and not just the terrorists, but Palestinians en masse think that fighting will serve their end. That thought needs to be wiped out. That cannot be the case for them thinking that, because as long as they have that idea, same thing with Israel having that idea, as long as that idea exists, peace will never happen. So
I'll get started. So today I'm hosting a debate between Democratic presidential candidate Cenk and a popular live streamer who's live streaming right now, and a political commentator, Destiny. So I want to jump straight into the first question, which is, and I'll start with Cenk, is Israel an apartheid state?
Yeah. So it really depends on your definition, but whether you say technically it's based on race or religion, and is it within the territory that you control, but what does it mean that you control the territory? You can, slice and dice that in a lot of different ways. But the most important part of it is, no matter what word you use, is Israel occupying the 5 million Palestinians?
I can't do anything about the volume.
Yes. Have they been doing it for over 50 years? Yes. Is that brutal oppression of the Palestinians? Yes. Is it a racist ideology to say that the Palestinians cannot govern themselves, that they're too violent and they just want to Holocaust the Jews and they could never be reformed and hence they need to be dominated, oppressed, and occupied for the rest of time? Yeah, that's a racist ideology, and it's been around for 50 to 75 years, and so no matter what label you put on it, it's completely and utterly unacceptable, and the occupation should end immediately.
Would you call it an apartheid?
Look, I don't mind calling it an apartheid. Yes, it is a version of apartheid. So in South Africa, it was white people doing it to black people within the same country. Here, eventually it should be 2 different countries, but Israel effectively controls all of that land and is doing it based on Palestinians. And they say, yes, Palestinians and Arabs can vote within Israel, but we have 5 million people that we're keeping in an open-air prison, but they don't count. No, they do count. You are oppressing them. You are occupying them. It's not a democracy when you occupy 5 million people. They don't have any sovereignty. So I don't feel uncomfortable calling it apartheid. If people catch feelings over that, well, then end the occupation, and then we'll call it a democracy, and everybody will be happy with the 2-state solution. And by the way, that'll make Israel much more safe. I mean, the whole point of Israel was to be a safe haven for oppressed Jews throughout the world. And as long as you continue to occupy the Palestinians, well, you're never going to get a safe haven, because who would agree to be occupied? Which people, whether they're race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, would say, yeah, we accept permanent occupation, and we love our occupiers. They're such wonderful people who do daily humiliation of us and take away our sovereignty. And golly gee, occupy us for as long as you like. No, they'll fight you, of course. And then you'll pretend to be outraged, and you'll say, oh, I can't believe it, these no-good terrorist savages. We need to occupy them another decade or so. No, end occupation immediately.
So what Israel would say to you in response to what you've said is they would say they're not occupying the Gaza Strip or anywhere like that.
Sure. Okay, and we don't have eyes or ears, but keep going.
Just as a real quick thing, can Cenk up his volume a little bit? He's kind of hard to hear. I don't know if there's a way to make it louder on your end.
Normally, I'm very easy to hear. I will try, brother.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome.
Can you hear Destiny? Can you hear Cenk?
Yeah, I can hear him. It's just he's kind of quiet compared to you and me.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not sure exactly how to do it. I'll keep trying as we keep going. But Eli, finish your question.
Yeah, so what Israel would say, that they're not occupying Gaza Strip, but what they are doing is putting a lot of security measures in place because there are a lot of dangers to Israel and to the security threat of Israel. So they would say it's the opposite way around. What they're doing is they're doing it to defend themselves rather than, I think what you're saying is by putting those security measures in place, or not security measures, you're saying further than that, but that is what's causing their attacks to come. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, obviously. So if I go and take 20 members of your family and I put them, lock them up in my backyard, and they can't control whether they can get out or they can't get out. They can't control the water, the power, electricity, and every once in a while I can come and kill some of them, and there's no consequences whatsoever. And then I say, well, I'm doing it for my own safety because I'm worried these guys might attack me. Well, they're much more likely to attack you if you keep imprisoning them in your backyard. So if you never end the occupation, what you wind up doing is creating a situation where there's a permanent state of conflict. And then to use that conflict as a justification for further imprisonment is ironic, because then at that point you're saying, well, I had to imprison them because they might attack me because I've imprisoned them. How about you try peace instead? And by the way, of course, Israel has tried peace in the past, and it has worked spectacularly. They did it with Egypt, and Egypt was considered the same exact propaganda was used against Egypt as the Palestinians. Violent, savage Muslims, they attacked us. It's a security issue. We have to contain them. They can never be trusted. They want to wipe out all the Jews. And then after the Camp David Accords, it turned out none of that was true. And they've had peace ever since. So Israel should do something dramatic, which is dramatically different than what they've been doing, which is peace. To actually do, and I would even do it unilaterally. I would do 1967 borders, build giant walls, say, sorry, nobody crosses the border, but you have your own state and you fully control it. And it would be incredibly magnanimous. It would be history making, and the world would deeply appreciate it. And it would make Israel 100 times safer.
Destiny, how would you respond?
To the initial part, to the apartheid question, I find that the apartheid question is entirely irrelevant to the analysis of the conflict. The problem isn't the apartheid conditions, kind of. The problem is the occupation. As long as the occupation continues, the apartheid will never end. If the occupation ends, then hopefully, as the Palestinians govern their state, the apartheid conditions wouldn't exist. So I feel like the fixation on the apartheid stuff is either somebody that doesn't understand what is required to end the apartheid, or unfortunately, I think sometimes it's people who are trying to sneak in or beg the question about a one-state solution. The idea that the only way the apartheid can end is if the conditions are equivalent for Israeli and Palestinian people all living under one state with the same rights to vote and with an infinite right of return for Palestinians. So I find that the fixation on apartheid is a little silly. I take issue with a lot of the comparisons that people draw when they talk about the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. People say things, or they use these analogies like, imagine if I locked people up in my backyard and then they attacked me. Well, what if they attacked you first and then you locked them up? Because the Gaza Strip wasn't always embargoed. The Gaza Strip wasn't always under the thumb of Israel as strictly as it is now. It was only after Hamas took power. It was only after rocket attacks. It was only after a number of terrorist attacks came from this region that Israel decided, hey, maybe we should lock this region down. There's a reason why the Gaza Strip is under careful surveillance and the West Bank isn't under the same types of restrictions for what goes in and out of that territory. There's a reason why Israel isn't the only country that has Gaza as an open air prison, but Egypt enforces that border as well. And it's because there's a lot of bad stuff that comes from this particular region, including terrorists, smuggled arms in and out, illegitimate cash used for bad things, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, in terms of just historically, when we talk about like the same propaganda was used against Egypt and that they want to wipe out the state of Israel, that wasn't propaganda. That was true. That was explicitly true. Nasser himself said it on like 4 or 5 or 6 different occasions, and everybody else surrounding Israel felt the exact same way. to be fair, they had reason to feel it. Ever since 48, they obviously didn't like them. But yeah, I mean, it's also true that as other states have pursued peace with Israel, Israel has indeed accepted peace. But I think that speaks more to the goodwill of the Israeli people, and it's not kind of any salvation for the Palestinians to look towards. As Egypt looked towards peace, Israel agreed. As Jordan looked towards peace, Israel agreed. As the Abraham Accords rolled out and other states in the Gulf looked towards peace, Israel agreed. What are the common factors? The common factors are other countries sincerely pursuing peace agreements with Israel. Palestinians have not really done that yet. Whether it's because they believe they can continue to fight and take more territory, or whether it's because they only want a one-state solution and are unwilling to negotiate a two-state solution, which seemed to be the case as Arafat was the leader of the PLO and basically abandoned all the negotiations that made those things possible. Who's to say? But if peace is ever going to happen here, and like the apartheid conditions, as we would say, are ever going to come to an end, it has to start with Palestinians ceasing things like endless rockets and terrorist attacks or endorsements of rockets and terrorist attacks, and with them sincerely coming to the table and trying to negotiate a two-state solution.
Wait, so just before we go over to Cenk, because you're shaking your head a lot, so I'm sure you've got a lot to say. But Destiny, do you think Israel are occupying Gaza?
I'm uninterested in the distinction. Some people will argue in terms of international law that for an occupation to be there, you require military troops on the ground to be running checkpoints and stuff. Other people say that even though it's not an occupation directly, it's effectively an occupation. I mean, to say that it's not an occupation, but the country around you literally controls your borders, your airspace, and basically everything that goes in and out of your country sounds kind of silly. So if somebody wants to call it an occupation, I'm not going to sit here and mince words over it. It's effectively an occupation. The only time this really matters is in certain international law. In certain international law, the ICJ is going to rule on things differently if they consider you an occupying power versus somebody that just has a blockade. So in matters of legality relating to international law, that might be an important conversation. But for the overall conversation, I would say effectively Israel's an occupying force of the Gaza Strip. Sure.
Cenk.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things I agree with Destiny on. One is the definition of occupying force, and also the discussion of apartheid. Obviously, Israel's in control. They control the borders. They control the sovereignty of Gaza and the West Bank. And when you can cut off the water and the power to an area, you definitely control it. You can call it occupation. You can call it apartheid. You can call it anything you like. But the bottom line is Israel controls those areas and can do pretty much anything they like within those areas. So now when it comes to hey, why a peace deal with Jordan and Egypt and not the Palestinians? Well, and is it because the Palestinians are inveterate terrorists and they just can't help themselves and just want to do violence and terrorism, as opposed to the other lovely Arabs around there who desire peace? And Israel, the peace seekers, does it with all their other neighbors, but not Palestine. No, absurd. So number one, so it's not Destiny's not wrong in saying that Egypt said a lot of terrible things about Israelis and Jews, etc., and went to war and tried to execute those terrible things that they said. That's right. That's because, and that's why you make peace deals with your enemies and not with your best friends. We don't need to make a peace deal with your best friend. You need to make it with your worst enemy. And so, but the important part of that is that once they made the peace deal, it stuck. So the idea, the propaganda that the Muslims cannot make peace and that they are so violent they must be occupied ad infinitum, forever and ever, is absurd, right? So obviously Egypt made a peace deal, and despite all of the rhetoric, totally abided by it. In fact, part of the reason why Gaza is an open-air prison is, yes, Israel controls its borders, and Destiny is right that Egypt also doesn't allow the Palestinians to control their border on Egypt, but that's because of the peace deal that Egypt and Israel made, and Egypt is abiding by that, no matter how unpopular it is, even within their own country, because their own population hates the brutal occupation of the Palestinians. But nevertheless, the Egyptian government says, no, I will abide by what Israel wants because of that peace deal. For Jordan to make a peace deal with Israel, much easier. For the UAE or Saudi Arabia to make a peace deal, much easier, because they're not occupied and there's no skin in the game. There's the moral support that they'd like to give their Arab brothers, potentially, maybe, but it's a much easier lift. And these days, Saudi Arabia, UAE actually agrees with Israel on 90% of stuff anyway. The hard part is what happened to the Palestinians. And so I don't want to over belabor going back to the history of 1948, but it is important in this context. So when Israel started, they came in and they said, okay, we're going to take half this land. Now, at that point, was half the population Jewish or eventually Israeli? No, of course not. And so they took it by force. And yes, the United Nations said they're allowed to take it by force. But tons of Palestinians were driven from their homes that they actually lived in. And they were told, you no longer can live in your homes. No, this is now a Jewish state. And you Muslims are now second-class citizens, or you're driven from the land. And by the time we got to the Oslo Accords, Israel controlled 78% of that land. And so the Palestinians were like, well, okay. And they were ready to make a deal on the remaining 22%. But then Ehud Barak was like, no, I want more. I want you to be confined to maybe 18% or 16%. And the Palestinians were like, well, when are you ever going to be satisfied? And the reality is I probably would have taken that deal because I understood that the Palestinians had no leverage at all. And with the awesome might of the American military behind Israel and our funding, that the Israelis were just going to grab more and more and more Palestinian land. And since then, that's exactly what they've done. So which leads to the last point for now, which is that, so they say, well, Gaza, we kind of left, and they don't have sovereignty. They can't control their borders, but they could govern themselves a little bit. And those sons of bitches still aren't satisfied. They don't have a state, but these unruly people will not accept being imprisoned, and they do violent attacks against Israel. So we hate them, and that's why we can't let them have sovereignty. But wait a minute. How about the West Bank, where they have actually abided by all of Israel's rules for decades now? The Palestinian Authority works along with the Israelis to enforce the occupation, yet Israel has still given them nothing. And the occupation continues, and it is obvious to everyone watching that Netanyahu and his government have no interest in peace, and they've stated it several times. The Israeli ambassador recently said, no, they are not looking for a peace solution, and they're not looking for two states, which means they're looking for permanent occupation, or perhaps one state where they drive the Palestinians into the sea. So there is no excuse for the occupation. The Palestinians in the West Bank have done everything right, and they're still enormously occupied, and the settlers grab more land every day, and they brutalize the Palestinians more every single day. So if Israel was actually willing to make peace, as Yitzhak Rabin was before he was assassinated, then they could get to a peace deal incredibly quickly.
Destiny?
Yeah, I disagree with almost everything. So first of all, the characterization of when we talk about the Palestinian people and why they don't want peace, this idea of like, are we being racist, or is it because we're Islamophobic? Are they just Muslims or whatever? I don't think any of that has a factor in here. And if you're analyzing the region and why these people don't want peace, I don't think that would be your driving force to saying they don't want it is because they're Muslim or because they're Arab. I think the problem is that the Palestinian people historically have been amped up by every single country around them for decades to fight for their entire country back. Every single country around this area was highly motivated in expelling all of the Jewish people out of Israel since the foundation of the country in 48. However, as time has gone on and as the Arab states have realized, well, I guess this is probably not going to happen, and as bilateral peace agreements have fallen between the Arab states and the Israeli country, yes, you're right, these peace deals, once they're made, they stick, but it's the other Arab countries that are making the peace deals. It's not the Palestinians. Egypt made peace, Jordan made peace, and we saw several countries under the Abraham Accords make peace, and once they did, Israel and those countries were chill, but nobody really seemed to bring the Palestinians along with them when the Arab countries were negotiating these peace deals, and the Palestinian people don't really seem interested in a peace. Seems like they're still interested in fighting, which is especially true if you look at who they consider themselves aligned with today, which is Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis, and then, whatever money they get shipped in from Qatar and whatever floats in from Turkey. So the allies that the Palestinians have today are more radical than they ever have been, especially the people that exist and operate out of the Gaza Strip, like Hamas or Islamic Jihad. So to say that like this is just a peaceful group of people that only desire peace or whatever is not necessarily true, but it's not because they're Muslim or because they're brown or because they're Arab or any weird reason like that. It's just because of the historical conditions that have led the Palestinian people to see Israel as an enemy that they could fight off if they just simply fought hard enough. I believe this is reflected in polling pre and post October 7th, where when you poll both Israelis and Palestinians, a majority of them in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and in Israel proper believe that if they continue to fight, the outcomes for them will only improve. improve. That's a position that they still all have. So the idea that you can pursue a meaningful peace with a group of people that believes this is probably not true. When you talk about like Egypt enforcing their border and that's some part of like an Israeli peace deal, that is absolutely not true. Egypt has had their own issues with, for instance, supplying electricity and water into the Gaza Strip, where I believe in 2017 a big crisis was caused because Hamas stopped paying their bills on it. Egypt has wanted to keep that border secure because for historical and modern reasons, they do not like anything associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and they don't like the fact that terrorists come from that region, and because even the modern Egyptian president has said that much like in the past with exactly what happened with Jordan and exactly what happened with Lebanon, if you let a bunch of Palestinian people cross that border and sit in your country, eventually they're going to use it as a staging ground for terrorist attacks, or they're going to try to coup you if you don't support their struggle, which again has historically been what Palestinian groups have done as they've moved out into surrounding countries. The current president of Egypt, El-Sisi, I don't know how to pronounce his name or whatever, has literally made this exact statement of being afraid of Palestinians operating from the Sinai, which is, again, a legitimate fear. When we talk about like Ehud Barak wanting more and more and more during negotiations in Camp David, that is just not true. Everybody around the world, including all of the Arab leaders, were shocked because Arafat walked into those negotiations where people were praying that they would get 91% of the original land that they had in the 67 borders, if we go by that. And I believe by the end of negotiations, it was up to 95% with, I think, 3% land swaps, 1 to 3% land swaps. And by the end of the Clinton parameters in the Taba Summit, it was up to 90, I think it might have been 95 to 97%. But Arafat always walked away from the deal because he thought that if he fought, he could get more. And that has been the history of Palestinian negotiations with Israel. To say that if Israel wanted peace, they would simply have peace is just not true, because peace with the Palestinians has always been contingent on either a one-state solution or a bastardized two-state solution with an infinite right of return that would eventually become a one-state solution. And every single Arab leader in the region has balked at Arafat for walking away from things like Camp David and have been shocked that he didn't agree to any of these proposals. And yeah, I don't think there's been any sane person that said that that Arafat was negotiating in good faith for any of these deals. And the idea that Ehud Barak was the one who was walking away from it, or he was pushing for more, when he literally hinged his entire political career, along with Clinton to some extent, not as much for Clinton because he was a two-term president, right, on settling these peace deals, and then he lost afterwards, is I think, ahistorical. Yeah, when we look at the difference also between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, people will say like, well, the West Bank has been peaceful. I mean, kind of. There are terrorist attacks that originate from there. Hamas will even operate out of there at some points. But to say that like the treatment of the people in the West Bank is the same as the people in the Gaza Strip is just not true. The West Bank is not under the same sort of embargo or blockade or conditions that exist in the Gaza Strip, and that's for good reason. I think that if the people in the Gaza Strip were to chill, I think that you'd probably see conditions there be similar to the West Bank conditions, and hopefully some sort of negotiated peace agreement can be reached. But obviously there's a lot of issues with the Palestinian Authority, and that both Israel and the Palestinians don't seem to like them very much. And there's a lot of issues with Palestinian leadership. Historically, it was Arafat, and then from 2004 to modern day, it's Abbas. And again, everybody hates these Palestinian leaders for a variety of reasons.
Cenk?
Yeah. So a lot to address there. So first, on blaming the other Arab countries. Yeah, I got no love for the leadership of many of those Arab countries, but the idea that, well, why don't they help the Palestinians, or they push the Palestinians to not get good deals? I don't know how that helps. They're not occupying the Palestinians. The Israelis are occupying the Palestinians. So it's just a way of shifting blame. Why don't the other Arabs do something? Okay. Well, they're not occupying the Palestinians. Israel is. So it's absurd. It's an absurd thing to say. And then what Destiny kept going back to is, the Palestinians are aligned with radicals. They do terrorism. Can you believe that they're going to more fundamentalist Islam, etc.? And they do this wherever they go. Come on, I don't think you mean that. There's no Palestinians in America.
Wait a second, Destiny, did you mean wherever they go, or do you mean basically only in Gaza?
I mean that there is an established history. In 1970, Black September, the PLO, led by Arafat, literally tried to coup the Jordanian king. I mean, when they moved up to Lebanon, like the civil wars in the 80s and afterwards that followed were because of Palestinian resistance groups, largely it contributed to this. The Fedayeen was sponsored by Nasser in Egypt all across the Israeli border, from Lebanon to Syria to Jordan to Egypt. Yes, the Palestinians, when they go to other countries, they the PFDL or whatever, the Palestinian Liberation People's Front or whatever, were launching terrorist attacks on hijacking planes. There was the Munich massacre. Like, yeah, obviously this happens. Of course it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I now understand what he's saying, and it all goes back to the same exact point. So he's like, they keep fighting back. When are they going to know that they're conquered? and just accept that they're lesser than the Israelis, and they should just accept their goddamn occupation. So, so why are the Palestinians doing terrorism in Munich? Because they're trying to get rid of the occupation. Now, I don't agree with that tactic. I don't think it's a constructive tactic, and I don't think it's a moral tactic. But that's why they're doing it. And why do they then lead efforts to overthrow the Jordanian government, et cetera? Because once you put people in a position where they're subjugated, they are going to go to the most radical positions that are possible. Because the people who push for moderation, and this happened when we invaded Iraq, when U.S. invaded Iraq, we thought, oh, when we do an invasion and we bomb the living crap out of Iraq and we oppress them and say, we're now your new rulers, well, I bet moderate forces come out and start a wonderful democracy. Well, of course that didn't happen. The most radical forces immediately won. And it was, you know, all of the most fundamentalist forms of Islam, first with the Shia, then with the Sunni, that were ascendant. That's what happens when you subjugate people, when you oppress people, they go to a radical position. So now when you do peace deals, they do not go to a radical position. They become a lot more moderate. And the Palestinians, and this is why I mentioned the racism, the Palestinians are not immune from being human beings. All human beings after peace deals, generally speaking, moderate their positions. When they are being oppressed and they are being imprisoned, they do not moderate their positions. That is true of all human beings. And to constantly set up this endless cycle of, I oppress you, I give you no rights, I humiliate you for decades on end, I murder your family anytime I like, can you believe the sons of bitches are fighting back? It's all their fault, they're violent, they're radicals wherever they go, they're violent wherever they go. It's an absurd, unsolvable equation that you put on the Palestinians' heads. So, and now to the land issue and the peace issue. I mean, Destiny, if I take 78% of your house, then I say to you, well, look, I got a peace offer for you. I'm going to give you 95% of the 22% that you have left. Am I not merciful? I don't think that you would think like, oh my God, you're so generous. You're telling me that I can keep 95% of the 22%? What a humanitarian you are. Nevertheless, by the way, if you flip it on me, the Palestinians, I would have taken that deal because it only got worse. And what Arafat never understood, and I'm not defending Arafat at all, is that you have no power. Israel is 2,000 times stronger than you, and America is 2 million times stronger than you. The deal is only going to get worse until you have no land at all. So that knucklehead never understood that. I would have taken the deal. But having said that, even Bill Clinton said afterwards that it was Ehud Barak that was unreasonable. So you can go back and look that up. And Clinton was greatly frustrated by the Israelis. And I get Barak's position. He's like, look, I have all of the power. I can oppress these people to the end of time. America's never going to do anything about it. The United Nations might complain, but they're never actually going to do anything about it. So, and I'll just keep taking their land. And that's exactly what Israel did. So you can blame Arafat for not taking that deal. But then if you're going to do that, then why doesn't Israel offer that same exact deal today? And the reality is, one, they won't, because the right-wing government, not everyone in Israel, but the right-wing government of Israel, and yes, the Israeli people constantly reelect them. So whenever the Palestinians support Hamas, or you see a poll where the Palestinians say, yeah, I want to do violence against the guy who's doing violence against me, and has been for 56 years, everybody goes, you see the Palestinians are terrorists. But when Israel has poll after poll and election after election, and they keep electing people who want to maintain the occupation, who do not want peace, who want to permanently humiliate the Palestinians, we never say the Israelis are at fault. So why the dichotomy? I would say do not blame the civilians either way, but I would ask the Israeli civilians, get back towards governments that will offer peace. And my guess is there's no way in the world, first of all, not my guess, Netanyahu and no one in that insanely radical right-wing war hawk, war crime riddled cabinet would ever offer any peace deal, even one that's absurdly stacked in Israel's favor. But if you got a new government, my guess even that the new government would never go back and offer the same deal as they had in the David Accords in 2000, because they think, no, now we moved in 750,000 settlers illegally into the West Bank. So we'd like to steal more and more Palestinian land. And then we all wonder why the Palestinians are frustrated. And I want everyone in the audience to think, just think about it if it's you. If someone came and took 78% of your land and then occupied you for 56 years, honestly, what would you do? And by the way, if you flip it and you say, oh, well, if you think that's not that big a deal, why don't we give 78% of Israel to the Palestinians and occupy the Israelis and then say it's the Israelis' fault for not getting to a peace deal, or pressure them, now you do the peace deal. Now we took your land, you do the peace deal. You would never flip it. You would never, the Israelis would never, ever, ever countenance that because it's grossly unfair.
Okay, so let's go. I think it's probably important to focus on the first point, which is about occupation. So
sure.
if Destiny, if you believe that Israel do occupy, you say sort of, but basically you say it occupies Gaza, can you understand Cenk's point, which is if someone's occupying you, then you will fight back?
Yeah, I mean, the occupation, it's important to talk about the occupation, but there are so many weird rewritings that we do in history to try to make this occupation sound like something way different than it actually is. And I've noticed that this is basically mutated and infected the common lexicon without anybody even really understanding what we're saying. Like, even the initial statement of if I take 78% of your house and then I say to you, blah, 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 what house? There was no house there that was owned by any particular group of people. The Ottoman Empire collapsed in World War I, and Britain and France had mandates to administer to territories and eventually trade these territories over to people there once those mandates expired. That was how most of the Middle East was essentially cut up, and Palestine is no exception there, or Palestine and Israel. When we talk about occupying territory from the Palestinians and how we're shifting blame away from other Arab countries when it's Israel that was occupying the territories, it seems like we feel very strongly about going back to the 67 borders. Well, what were the 67 borders? The 67 borders didn't have a Palestine. The 67 borders had, surprise, the West Bank being occupied by then country Transjordan, and the Gaza Strip being occupied by Egypt. None of these places were ran by Palestinians. There were no Palestinian governments. The Palestinians in the West Bank immediately declared themselves allegiant to the Jordanian king, and that's why 2/3 of Jordan today are Palestinians. And the Gaza Strip had a puppet government set up for, I think, about a year that was eventually brought back into Cairo and then dissolved immediately as Egypt ran the Gaza Strip. It's very interesting that there are all of these calls to go back to the 67 borders and the 67 borders. Why not the 47 partition plan? That was something that the entire United Nations also agreed on. And people will say, well, it's not fair to give that much land when only, some percentage of the people there were Israelis. Well, the difference is that the land that was going to be partitioned to the Palestinians was going to be 98% Arab. The land that was going to be allotted to the Jewish people was 55% Jewish. So it's not going to be a 50-50 split because there's still a huge Arab minority that ends up living on those lands. When we talk about how the other Arab states, saying that they have an obligation to help the Palestinians is just shifting the blame as well, that's not true. They don't just it's not about shifting the blame. It's about assigning some blame that rightfully belongs there. Palestinian refugees are a very unique place in the world right now, where after the Arab League did, I believe it was Resolution 1457, the Arab League has decided that no countries surrounding Israel are to give citizenship to any Palestinian. That's why they live on these refugee camps on the borders for decades. It's because the Arabs have explicitly decided we will not give citizenship or resettle any of the Palestinians living here so that we can continue this indefinite struggle and fight against the enemy of Israel. It's why the UN RWA has no obligation even to resettle Palestinian refugees. All they do is they provide services. That's why every single year we hear this number touted out over and over again, 4 million, 5 million, 6 million refugees. Of course the refugee number continues to grow, and it leads everybody to think that even more and more are getting kicked out, but that's not true. You can be a Palestinian that lived in Lebanon, moved to the United States, and then adopted a child, and that child can have a kid, and that adopted child's child is considered a Palestinian refugee. It's an insane circumstance, and all it does is to foment this like antagonistic attitude towards Israel. So I wouldn't say that the Arab states have necessarily an obligation to solve this crisis for Israel. A lot of it is Israel's fault, I would agree. However, they certainly don't help, and I think it could be made a strong argument that they're intentionally antagonistic when it comes to fomenting desire to fight with Israel from these Palestinian people. When you say, also real quick, when you say once you do peace deals, Palestinians become more moderate, that is also not true. It is true that the 93 Oslo Accords ended the first intifada, but the failure of Camp David to actually reach a peace deal led to the second intifada, which was probably one of the largest radicalization events in recent Israeli history. It's what it's like big historians like Benny Morris ended up changing their mind on, will a two-state solution even be workable? Because after seeing the violence that exploded across Israel from even Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinian Arabs, people were like, holy shit, maybe these people actually never do want peace.
Come on.
Oh, and then also, just on the final one, you said Israel is 2,000 times stronger than you. America is 2 million times stronger than you. This is another disingenuous argument. The argument has never been Israel versus Palestine. That is ahistorical. Israel is not worried about Palestine. In the past, Israel was worried about the united front of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon going to war with it over and over and over again in 48, in 56, in 67, and in 73. And then after that, now the worry is Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. Now the worry is Iran and Turkey and Qatar are funding extremists in the Gaza Strip that are doing terrorist attacks. Now the worry is what kind of weapons are Hezbollah and the Houthis going to get as they hijack ships and launch missiles in. So yeah, I mean, I agree that Israel's not under the same threat that it was in the past, but to pretend like there's no threat today, or it's literally just Israel versus the Palestinians, where do you think Palestinians get their weapons from? They don't have manufacturing plants in the Gaza Strip for AK-47s as much as they might like to divert funds to it.
No, wait, so just before I go to Cenk, I just want to push you on what Cenk's, Destiny, I just want to push you on what Cenk said. Do you think that if Israel is occupying Gaza, don't you understand that the people in Gaza will fight back?
I mean, if that's the case, then we have an immovable. I don't believe that's the case. I think that is the truly racist position, that people in Gaza are somehow genetically obligated to support an Islamic Sunni fundamentalist group that is going to spend every waking second digging up old water pipes and shooting rockets indiscriminately into Israel. I don't believe the Palestinian people there are obligated to that forever. I think I think Iran needs to stop, and I think that the support from extremist groups need to stop, and I think that the Palestinian people living in Gaza can also stop. We don't need to launch rockets every single day, okay? You can't complain about a lack of fuel for your hospitals when you're shooting thousands of rockets off into civilian neighborhoods in Israel. That just can't be the case. I think that a better job can be done there, and I think it's going to be really hard to convince Israel, like, hey, listen, I know, whoa, wait. Look at me over here, okay? Don't look at all the rockets that are coming, again, for the 5 millionth day in a row, okay? We need to stop embargoing them and do peace and, like, oh, I didn't know if that was a bird or another paraglider coming over here to murder our civilians. But yeah, we need to basically unlock that whole property and let them at peace. And I think that they'll chill like immediately when the entire history of these regions has never been peaceful. It just has never happened yet. So I think we should give peace a chance.
Cenk, I think you've got a chance to respond there, but he said it's racist. What's your response to all of this?
Yeah, I honestly think he's lost the thread in sorry, Destiny, but a lot of the things you're saying don't make any sense. First, you say that there are no Palestinians, that there was no house to divide, and that the Palestinian people didn't even exist. So what's the big deal about taking that land? No, they drove tons of Palestinians from their lands, from their villages. They killed them. So, and they didn't run from their homes because things were going great and the Israelis had come to give them a hug. Okay, no, you're saying things that are so absurd that I know the Israeli side now believes it like a religion. Like, oh no, there was no one on that land, and we just walked into the fields, and it was just all us, and we declared it an open field, a Jewish state, and the Palestinians panicked for no reason. Those dastardly, non-existing people then attacked us for no reason. Come on, nobody believes that. Outside of the Israeli position, and the whole world thinks, no, obviously you came and took their land, and that's why they fought you. And then at the one time you say that there is no such thing as a Palestine, no such thing as Palestinians, and then you turn around and you say that no matter where Palestinians go, they're unreasonable, radical, terrorist, and violent. So which one is it? Do they exist or don't they exist? Was no big deal to take their lands and their homes because they weren't a people anyway? Or they are a people, and oh boy, I'm not racist, but man, those guys are violent wherever they go. They're terrorists wherever they go. And then you keep talking about how they're attacking Israel as if it's Norway and Sweden, and the Norwegians are randomly violent guys who just attack Sweden for no reason at all. They're under occupation. Look, you keep making it seem like it's the Palestinians that are driving this issue, when you've never answered the question. I've asked it. Eli's asked it, and look, there's a giant gun on the wall behind you. You could pretend that the Israelis never took any Palestinian land, but no one believes you. I mean, we have eyes. Of course they took Palestinian land. Of course 5 million Palestinians are occupied right now. And my guess, Destiny, is based on everything you've ever said in your life, based on all the paraphernalia you have, based on how much you love guns and fighting back and all that stuff, that if they came and took 78% of your land or 50% of your land or even 5% of your house, then you'd grab that gun behind you in the wall and you'd try to murder them. And you would say that it was self-defense. But when Palestinians do anything at all, that terrorists, radicals, they had it coming, occupying them for longer. It's their fault. And then when you say, oh, well, why don't the other Arab states take them? As if they're all the same. But wait a minute, that's ethnic cleansing. That's driving 5 million people from where they live today. Get out of your house. Who cares about your house? Who cares about your land? And why don't I just drive you into Jordan or drive you into Syria? That's literally the definition of ethnic cleansing. Last thing. Look, the Turkish-Syrian border is an interesting example. After the World War I, they did arbitrary borders, and my family lived near the Syrian border on the Turkish side, and some of my grandfather's land got stuck on the Syrian side, and that sucks. And there were Turks on the Syrian side, there were Arabs on the Turkish side, and that was unjust. But overall, nobody was getting oppressed. They had their own countries, and they went back and forth, and it was fine. But during recent conflicts, Turkey did an incursion into northern Syria. Now the situation is completely different. And when Turkey was occupying that for a short period of time, I said Turks have to withdraw immediately. It doesn't matter that the lines were arbitrary before. You cannot occupy those people. You must move back. And luckily they did. Okay. But that's the difference. Okay. You can't just say, well, I don't know, it was all arbitrary in the first place. The Ottoman Empire used to control it. So we just took a whole bunch of it. We drove people from their homes and then we occupied them for 56 years. But there are no Palestinians and they should never fight back and they should just be occupied. That's just totally unreasonable.
Destiny, I mean, there's some points to respond to, but I'm going to push back on I'm going to push the question that Cenk and I both have asked you.
Yeah, what's the question? He said I'd never answered a question, but I didn't hear what the question was. What about
you do? You've got the gun behind you.
What?
If someone came and took some of your land, we can argue about the
or
percentage.
occupied you.
And said, okay, now look, I'm giving you 22% of your own home, but you're in prison there. Would you grab that gun and do something about it? Or will you say, yes, sir, I will accept my occupation and I will accept any peace deal you give me, sir. You are right, sir. And I love you, sir. I do not hate you. I love you.
I would take my gun and I would fight to the death to protect my land.
Okay, great.
But that's not what we're talking about here, Cenk.
Oh, of course.
You're talking about your great-grandfather losing his house, grabbing a shotgun, and then going to kill people that live there that weren't even alive when he lost it. We need to understand that what we're talking about here isn't an occupation that started yesterday or 5 years ago or even 30 years ago. We're talking about a conflict that started arguably in 1881, escalated heavily in the early 1900s, and then exploded it from 47 to 49, essentially, when the Civil War and then the War of Independence started, right? If you're making a mistake to assume that I think that in 48, when all the surrounding Arab states declared war against Israel, which I notice is something that's always left out when we talk about the Nakba and we talk about the expulsion of Arabs from Jewish land, because remember, when the Israelis accepted that 47 partition agreement, they accepted that agreement with 45% of their population being Arabs. They said we were A-okay with it. The surrounding Arabs said, no, we're going to actually ethnically cleanse you and we're going to kick you all out of here. That's what the Arab states wanted back then. The Jewish people fought, they won, and now we're dealing with the consequences of that ever since. But let's not confuse the history here. The Jewish people were not just randomly expelling 711,000 people from their lands. It was in response to all of the surrounding Arabs attempting to, I'll say ethnically cleanse instead of genocide, which might have happened. We'll say ethnically cleanse to be nice, okay? So that's the important thing. If you ask me about the 48 war, though, and you say, Destiny, do you think that it was okay that all the Arabs tried to defeat the Jewish people in that point in time? I actually think it's totally within reason. I think in 48, if they would have ethnically cleansed all the Jews out of there, the Europeans essentially came in, I would have been like, yeah, I totally get it. They came in, they bought land from large swaths of owners that expelled a lot of tenant owners. It feels like they came in under the sanction of the British, was kind of true, kind of not. I think I can understand the fighting in 48. I can even understand the fighting in 67, but we have to acknowledge that at some point in time, the fighting has to stop. And we're not talking about protecting our house today. We're talking about going to our great-grandfather's house and killing the people that live there now, and that just can't be the rules for the world. It can't be that Russia is allowed to invade Crimea because Crimea happens to be mostly ethnically Russian, because prior to 91 and in the early 1900s in the Holodomor, a ton of Russians moved in ethnically and now settled that area. That can't be the way that it works. At some point, we have to say, all right, we fought, we lost, and now we have to figure out what are the rules going forward, because with what you're saying now, that they have a right to fight against their occupation, The people that use that ideology, those people aren't fighting for a two-state solution. Those people are fighting for a one-state solution. When they talk about the occupiers, they're not talking about the fence around Gaza, and they're not talking about the settlers in the West Bank. They're not talking about the settlements in Hebron. They're talking about all of Israel. Those are the occupiers. So at some point, we need to say, listen, we had a righteous cause, and unfortunately, we lost. Same as Ukraine and Russia today. If Russia manages to hold Crimea and their land bridge, and they peel off the Donbass, and they peel off Crimea, you know what? It sucks, but unfortunately, at some point, you have to say, all right, the fighting stops. 100 years from now, Ukraine can't reinvade that peninsula. They can't reinvade those regions. That's just unfortunately the way that it works, unless we want to justify either one, infinite conflict, or two, tell Israel, listen, Israel, since these guys are basically infinitely justified to fight you, you kind of have to either cleanse all of them or genocide them, because those are the only options that you're leaving on the table when you make those kinds of statements.
Cenk, just before you respond, just keep in mind that we've done 45 minutes over one question, so if you're able to do a bit of a shorter response so we can move on to other questions, that would be great.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things I agree with Destiny on there. So first of all, let me start with one disagreement. You say these people, they want all of Israel. Yeah, and there's a lot of people in Israel that want greater Israel, erect Israel, from the river to the sea, and drive the Palestinians into the sea. We have to ignore both of those sides if we're ever going to get to peace. We have to find the partners for peace on both sides. And are there partners on the Palestinian side who would take a two-state solution? Definitely. Mahmoud Abbas would take it tomorrow. And so you could take the most extreme Palestinian and pretend that all Palestinians are on that side. And of course, under occupation, it leads to more extremism. And you can take the most extreme Israeli position and say all Israelis are on that side, but it's not true. There are plenty of people who can make peace deals on both sides. But I do agree that the right of return is gone. And if you're a Palestinian and that breaks your heart that you're not going to be able to get back your home from after the Nakba in 1948, I'm sorry, I love you, and I wish that hadn't happened to you, but you're not going to get it back. It has to be two states. Otherwise, it's going to be endless war. So we've got to separate, no question about it. It's also absurd to say, oh, that's ancestral Jewish land, which goes to the point that Destiny was making, which is, yeah, I mean, I could say that it's all ancestral Ottoman land. Give it all back to the Turks. There's no end to that. So I don't care about your voodoo about, oh, no, my voodoo says it's my land and my voodoo says it's my land. I don't care about either one of your voodoos. Don't care at all. I just want to get the peace, two-state solution, roughly 1967 borders. And again, Destiny, you agree that you would resort to violence and you'd resort to violence immediately. So, well, that's what happened in 48. And you said that makes sense to you. 67, you said that makes sense to you. And right now, it's not theoretical. It's not about right of return. That may be for some Palestinians. But right now, their number one concern by far and away is the current occupation. So you've agreed that you would fight back in 48 if you were Palestinian, 67. So, well, they're being occupied today. The daily humiliations and mass murder. So would you fight back if you were a Palestinian today living under the occupation?
Today it can't be fighting. It can't be Hamas. From a moral point of view, killing civilians is almost impossible to justify, bordering on impossible, maybe impossible. So supporting a terrorist group is almost never going to be the answer, number one. And then number two, from a pragmatic point of view, it just makes everybody hate you. Like it hurts your ability to pursue any sort of peaceful agreement. There's a reason why the ANC had the tactics that they did, and they tried not to kill civilians, and that wasn't their explicit goal. There's a reason why MLK's thoughts prevailed over Malcolm X's thoughts, and why the largely advocacy of nonviolent movements were the ones that brought about civil rights. Is the reason why a lot of the BLM stuff became unpopular, because the rioting and the violence turned people against that movement. The Palestinians, I think it's possible they have to see the same thing, that like, okay, well, listen, this sucks and the occupation is unfair, which is fine. And to some extent, I can agree with that. If you live in Gaza, holy shit, your life sucks, right? Half your population are basically children. You have shitty access to water. You have, electricity that only lasts for so many hours a day. There's a lot of living conditions that suck there. But the answer can't be like, I'm going to drink a little bit less today because I'm going to fire one more rocket over at Israel and expect that something is going to change at some point in time. That cannot be the path that they're on. And I feel like the rest of the world has taken the place of the prior Arab states now and hyping those Palestinians up into thinking that, like, well, listen, if you guys just keep fighting, like, eventually Israel's going to come to the table and form a two-state solution. Just so everybody understands that's listening to this, if you want a two-state solution, the worst thing that you can do is encourage Palestinians to fight, because right now, all Israel is going to do is they're going to say, look at what happened on October 7th. Kind of looks like the Holocaust, huh? Makes us feel pretty bad. And while they say that, and while they push into Gaza, and while they destroy that, and we're up to almost, 19,000? Probably over 20,000 deaths once we get through the rubble and everything, right? Well, what's happening in the West Bank? Well, Israel is expanding their settlements. They're probably getting ready to annex Area C. They're continuing to shore up their demographic majority over there. All that's happening is Palestinians are losing more and more and more and more and more over time. Somebody has to be talking to the Palestinians. In the past, it was Saudi Arabia, it was Egypt, it was Jordan. I think they've given up on it, right? Now the only people that whispers into the ears of the Palestinians are Iran and then their terrorist wings, basically. Somebody has to tell the Palestinians, it's time to stop fighting. It's time to chill the out, and it's time to come to the table and legitimately try to negotiate a two-state solution. And unfortunately, whatever Abbas thinks is kind of irrelevant, because I'm pretty sure if you were to do a democratic election, Abbas's support would be in the negative numbers. So somebody has to be willing to voice to the Palestinian people or lead the Palestinian people in a way that they just haven't had that leadership in the past, because holy shit, it hasn't been Abbas and it has not been Arafat that have done it effectively in a way that's pursuing peace.
Wait, so let me just go on to the next question, just because we need to move on. You mentioned about civilian casualties, which is actually an amazing segue onto the next point. So can we agree, or at least I'd love to hear your perspective on this, that Israel's actions since October the 7th, from how they've retaliated against Gaza and against Hamas, as you mentioned, there's probably around 19,000 casualties at this point, 20,000 casualties at this point. Can we agree that at worst, that's a genocide, and at best, that's an army that doesn't care enough about Palestinian lives? Destiny.
Are we saying that because of the October 7th, or I'm sorry, because of the incursions into Gaza, Israel doesn't care about Palestinian lives? Is that essentially the question?
No, the question of how they've reacted since then, of all the civilian casualties have been. I mean, even for example, they killed accidentally 3 hostages of their own hostages. I mean, doesn't that say something?
I mean, what does it say? I think
who are holding white flags.
So here are issues that I have with Israel and the IDF, okay? One, here are some broad issues, and then I'll focus it more into Gaza, okay? So one is settler violence seems to be really hard for the IDF to account for in the West Bank, okay? There are settlers that will kill people in the West Bank, that will kill Palestinians, that either it goes unanswered or the punishments are suspect, as in they probably should be higher. And then you also see a lot of antagonism towards people in the West Bank, including from the IDF. These are bad things that need to be rectified. Okay, when you look in the West Bank. When you look in the Gaza Strip, the civilian casualty count is high, and there are actions that happen that I think we should ask questions about. So my understanding is, I don't think anything else has come out, for those 3 hostages that came out, they were shirtless and they were waving a white flag on a stick, okay? How these 3 people end up getting killed by the IDF, not only is that unacceptable, obviously, should also make you question, well, if that happened and those were hostages, have there been other instances of the IDF shooting people that also were presenting similarly in conditions where they were clearly or obviously not a threat? That being said, while these incidents do happen and they're horrible, something that we need to keep in mind is that we have an unprecedented view into the day-to-day ongoings of military conflict that we have never had in the past. I am sure that we've seen it happen on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, where civilians or soldiers that seem to have surrendered or that aren't threats are being killed, either by drones, either by soldiers, either by grenades. We are having an unprecedented look into military conflict on the day-to-day. To assume that this is like magnitudes worse than ever it has been, or that military conflict was historically, is probably not true. That doesn't excuse any of the actions, of course. It should always come under review. There should be other people that are investigating potential war crimes, whether that's Israel being forced to evaluate or third-party people like Amnesty International or the UN Human Rights Watch evaluating it. Like all of these things, I think the more eyes on this, the better. Okay, 1, 2. However, a couple other things. One, I don't like the term indiscriminate killing because, one, if it was truly indiscriminate and there were truly carpet bombing runs, Dresden saw 50,000 people evaporated in like 24 hours, okay? The Tokyo bombing saw more people disintegrated than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined when it came to bombing. That's what indiscriminate bombing looks like, and both of those areas were far less densely populated than the Gaza Strip. We need to be asking questions about how do we deal with Hamas in a way that limits civilian casualties, but doesn't just let Hamas get off scot-free. That cannot be the answer. I agree that the civilian casualty count is high, even if I accept that Israel is saying it is killing Hamas terrorists. I think they've said, 5,000? That still leaves 10,000 plus civilians that have been killed by Israeli munitions. It's not good, but the answer cannot be ceasefire, 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 where Hamas remains in power. That's unbelievably unacceptable, and I think it shows an insane inability to empathize with the Israeli side here that just got essentially 9/11, a month and a half ago.
Oh, wait, so let me actually push you on the question I actually asked. Do you think Israel care enough about Palestinian lives?
Do I think they care enough about them? I would lean like 51-49 yes. The issue is that I don't have insight into the decisions that are being made in Israeli command when it comes to choosing targets. It could be the case that tomorrow, let's say a huge commission is ran and you find out that the IDF is looking at a target, they're saying, there was a Hamas in here 7 days ago, let's f***ing bomb it. And they blow up an entire apartment complex and 40, 50, 60 civilians die. That's not acceptable. It could be the case that we see in a lot of targets, there's Hamas operating out of here. We've dropped leaflets. We know that they use this for command. We've done everything we can. We were going to bomb it. They bomb it. 20, 30 civilians are killed. I'd say in that sense, they did essentially what they could. I don't know what the alternatives here are. I'd love to hear them if there are any, because it seems like the only thing people say is ceasefire and peace, which cannot happen with Hamas. So yeah, I would lean towards, just on the numbers that I've seen so far and everything, it seems like Israel is considering civilian casualties, as much as people want to say they aren't, but I can't truly give you an honest answer to that without understanding the decisions that are being made within the Israeli military, because that could go either way.
Cenk, there's a lot to respond to there.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the earlier question just for 1 second, because I don't want to be misunderstood. I actually agree with Destiny that the Palestinians should reject terrorism. I don't think it's a moral or productive pathway to peace. I don't think it's the right way to go at all. The reason I object is because I don't want Palestinians characterized as some sort of violent, savage terrorist wherever they go, like as if it's just out of whole cloth. There's nothing we could do about them. We just have to occupy them forever because of these violent savages. No, they're fighting back in a way that is counterproductive and not the right way to fight back. But I can understand why. And I think any human being, and it seems like even Destiny can understand why you would fight back if you were under occupation or someone took your land, your home, etc. And the Palestinian Authority, and this is going to come back to this question at the end, did actually do the right path. They went to the UN and asked for a state just like Israel did. And Israel called it terrorism, because Israel calls everything terrorism, even if the most diplomatic, peaceful path there is. And Netanyahu was screaming bloody murder about it. Anti-Semitic, terror. It makes no sense at all. And they do it anyway because he doesn't want peace. And he said it many times, and now the Israeli ambassadors are saying it publicly. They don't want peace. They just want to grab that land. The occupation is not an accident for 56 years. It's because they wanted to do it. Okay, so now on to the question of how they've been acting since October 7th in their destruction of Gaza. So this is not like, oh my God, we were trying to avoid civilian casualties, but golly gee, the IDF has the worst aim in the world. It's just a totally incompetent military that accidentally kills tens of thousands of civilians. No, they're dropping 2,000. Let's talk facts. They're dropping 2,000-pound bombs. The U.S. never dropped a bomb larger than 500 pounds in the worst fighting in Iraq, because in residential areas, we determined, as much as, although our invasion of Iraq was awful and horrific and hundreds of thousands of civilians died eventually through the conflict and killings on both sides. But even in that horrific situation, we thought, well, you can't go more than 500 pounds in a residential area. That's just indiscriminate murder of civilians. Israel's going 2,000-pound bombs on top of residential buildings. Now, New York Times just had a story about how a lot of the bombs that they're dropping, nearly half, about 45%, are what's called dumb bombs. They're not even precision guided. They're just dropping them in the middle of a residential city, and they're barely aiming. And then the third fact is that we've seen that because of the IDF videos, the tunnels that Hamas has, it looks like they are largely totally intact. And even Netanyahu in an interview said, once we started the ground invasion, we finally started to do some damage to Hamas. Oh, so the 29,000 bombs that you dropped in an area the size of Las Vegas, you basically just implied and admitted that they didn't work at all in getting Hamas. Hamas is in the tunnels are totally unaffected. And you knew that. But they're still dropping bombs on civilians. And so now they not only have they killed now at a bare minimum about 10 to 15 times the number of civilians that Hamas did, making them 10 to 15 times worse terrorists. Let's be clear about our definitions. If you murder civilians and you're a Palestinian, you're called a terrorist. When you murder civilians and you're Israel, you're called a wonderful ally and a democratic nation who just keeps missing with all their 2,000-pound bombs as they dropped 29,000 of them. No, they're murdering civilians. Every bomb dropped on Gaza is an act of terrorism. No ands, ifs, or buts. But even if you take the ridiculous, absurd IDF numbers, and everyone knows that IDF, almost every statement they put out is propaganda. They're in the middle of war. I get it. Both sides do propaganda. But if you take their outlandish number of 5,000, they've shown almost no Hamas fighters. They showed like one pair of boots and a couple of flak jackets. They have all of the capability of showing evidence, pictures, videos, etc. They've shown almost no dead Hamas fighters. But okay, let's say the 5,000 is real. It's hilarious, totally not. But okay, even if you granted that, over 19,000 dead now. When Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, all the things they did were horrific, but they killed about 373 soldiers, and the rest, about 800 or so, were civilians. And I condemn that incredibly forcefully. Definitely the wrong way to go, definitely immoral, definitely terrible. But Hamas's ratio is still better than Israel's ratio, let alone the raw numbers. So if Israel is killing 10 to 20 times more civilians, and their ratio of civilians to Hamas fighters, even by the best numbers that they give, is still worse than Hamas, well, who's the bigger terrorist? I actually don't think that there's any factual question about that at all. There might be an emotional reaction you have. No way. I love Israel. They can't be terrorists. I hate the Palestinians. They're obviously terrorists. But the numbers indicate that Israel is doing far more terrorism. And by the way, they're doing far more terrorism against the people they occupy and oppress already. Okay, whereas the Palestinians are fighting back in a misguided way, but that's the reality of the situation. And this whole idea of Hamas remains, so we have to keep murdering Palestinian civilians. And we have eyes. We can see the babies. We can see their body parts being pulled out of the rubble. We can see that 9,000 children have died. My heart broke, and I was very adamant on air about how terrible the Hamas attack was on October 7th. My heart broke for those 37 kids killed in Israel. 36 kids killed in Israel. 9,000 kids killed in Gaza. The idea that Israel is not doing terrorism, that Israel is not the oppressor, that Israel is not being absurdly brutal in their destruction of Gaza just doesn't pass any sanity test, because the whole world can see Gaza is absolutely destroyed and their civilians are being butchered. We all got eyes. We all have ears. And finally, this is really important. What is an alternative to the impossible standard of Hamas has to surrender? I mean, that's such an absurd thought. Like Hamas that's perfectly fine in the tunnels is going to come out and go, okay, we wave the white flag. We're right here, Israel. Bomb right here. Kill us. We surrender. It's not a thing that's ever going to happen. It's a purposely impossible standard. So that finally gets to, well, then how the hell do we resolve this? Here's what you do. If you actually want peace, Israel would go to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and they would say, we're going to do a two-state solution. We're going to give you the same deal that we gave you back in 2000 with Ehud Barak. I know Arafat didn't take it, and it wasn't the greatest deal in the world, but you're going to take that deal. I'm not even talking 1967 borders. I'm talking 2000 offer, okay? And Mahmoud Abbas would definitely take that deal. Now, Palestinian Authority, you're going to come into Gaza, and you're going to push Hamas out, but you're going to have the credibility to do that because you just delivered the Palestinian state. That is something that actually could, if Israel chose to go in that direction, they could definitely make that happen. That way, Hamas is defeated. We do get to a two-state solution, and that's completely in Israel's hands. But instead, they're choosing what appears to be an infinite bombing campaign where they're going to continue to commit endless war crimes and massacre tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians. Any defense of it is absurd and morally indefensible.
Cenk, I just want to push you on two of the things that you said. Number one is about proportionality, or comparing what Hamas did to what Israel is doing. Why does that matter? I mean, if you really want to compare, what are you going to say, that Israel should go in and rape women, or what's the matter of the comparisons? And number two is about, Destiny actually mentioned this, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. He said he doesn't know what the IDF is doing, but he doesn't know the IDF's actions or what their thoughts are. So how can he criticize them and say what they're doing is terrible and not actually getting the results they want, when you don't really know what they're trying to do in the whole mission statement?
So those are good questions. Let me answer those. So number one, in terms of what Hamas did, the raping and et cetera, killing babies, I condemn it 1,000,000,000%. What so incredibly dumb, let alone deeply immoral. Okay. And terribly counterproductive to the Palestinian cause, let alone those poor Israeli civilians who were killed. Now, is it better when Israel drops a 2,000-pound bomb and in that residential building, 3 babies' heads are crushed and their brains are splattered across the floor? The bombs light a couple of grandmothers on fire and they die in a fiery death. Moms, aunts, uncles, etc. Israel incinerates them alive and then goes, no, you see how much better I am than Hamas? Because I dropped a bomb and it looks like a video game. So I'm good. I didn't do it with my bare hands. No, that is not any better morally. And when you kill 20 times as many people, it's definitely not better morally. And in terms of IDF's intent, no, you're right. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what their intent is, but I know what their actions are, and actions show intent. So when Hamas did the October 7th attack, was their intent to cause damage to civilians and to cause psychic damage and to terrorize Israel? Yes, you can tell their intent by their actions. So when the IDF drops bombs on residential areas, murders 19,000 people, but even if you take the IDF numbers, 5,000 Hamas fighters, and murders 14,000 civilians, you can't then come back and go, and drops dumb bombs, 29,000 of them in an area the size of Las Vegas, and they're 2,000-pound bombs, and then go, oh, golly gee, did I murder all those civilians with my gigantic bombs that I dropped indiscriminately in Gaza? I have the purest intent. I just have the world's worst military. No one believes that.
Destiny, there's a lot to respond to.
Yeah, almost every single thing said is ridiculous. So starting at the beginning, so when we say it is, you can stop me if you disagree with anything I say. Okay, I can go through all of these at one point in time, or all of these point by point. When we say that Palestinians can't be viewed as violent savages, I absolutely agree with that. That is 100% true. But it's equally dishonest and possibly even more harmful to pretend that it is a population of doves that just has a few bad apples. That is not true. The entirety of the Palestinian population, why are you shaking your...
the Israeli population? You should stop me anytime.
Sure.
So the Israeli population...
Wait, can I ask one quick question?
Murder. Keep murdering them.
Yep.
You haven't murdered enough Palestinian children yet. Now, I don't believe that. That's why I think it's a bad way to go.
Can you tell me a 5-year period?
I don't want to blame the Palestinian civilians. And there are no doves on either side because they're in the middle of the war.
That's not what we're talking about. Can you give me a 2-year period from 2006 onwards where rockets haven't poured into Israel from the Gaza Strip?
Can you give me a 2-year period where they weren't brutally occupied, where we're going to pretend that, like, oh my God, why are they firing rockets?
They weren't occupied before Hamas took over, coup d'etat, kicked them out, and then started launching attacks into Israel in 2006. After Israel's they unilaterally withdrew all the settlements in 2005. Prior to that, there was no occupation. There was no blockade. There was nothing like that. It was the second intifada that saw weapons being shipped in from Turkey and Iran that caused Israel to say, well, you know what? If these guys are going to be shipping in money, arms, terrorist training, tactics, everything from the sea, maybe we need to close those pathways off. So no, I can tell you easily, prior to 2006, that did not happen for the entire time period from 48 onwards.
So look, Hamas, it killed democracy in Gaza,
No,
Okay.
that is not true. That is a lie. Hamas did not kill democracy. Hamas won their elections. That is important to understand about the Palestinian people living in Gaza. Hamas won. It was a plurality of the support, but they won support from those people in those elections. They didn't just take over out of nowhere. They had popular support.
Then there were no other elections since then.
Yeah.
Correct. That is true. There weren't. But guess what? There haven't been elections in the West Bank either, have there been? Because Abbas suspended elections too. You know why? Because he wouldn't win any, and he knows it. So it's not even fair to act like Abbas and the PA are doing. I'm sorry. What part of that is not true? Why are you shaking your head?
Yeah, so let me explain all the parts that aren't.
Go ahead.
So Hamas won the original election, but so did the warmonger Netanyahu. He's won many, many elections, and he's murdered Palestinians endlessly. And the Israeli people are like, "Yay!"
What does that have to do with anything?
Netanyahu again? So
hold on. Who won the election after Netanyahu's first term? Who was the next prime minister? It was Ehud Barak, who pursued one of the most ambitious peace deals ever. The difference between Israel and the difference between the Palestinians is Israeli citizens live in a democracy, and they do push their people towards peace, or they did prior to the Second Intifada. Barak was the prime minister afterwards. He did the Camp David Accords. He hitched his entire prime ministership on getting some sort of peace deal. And guess what? Arafat walked away, didn't even provide a counter deal, and we went right into the Second Intifada, where yes, after that, all we saw was conservative prime ministership after conservative prime ministership. Who's surprised at that?
Okay, so let me finish the thought. So first of all, Hamas won those elections, and for the last quarter of a century or so, bloody, violent, right-wing politicians in Israel that constantly talk about Amalek and exterminating the Palestinians have won election after election. But I don't think this is helpful. I do not blame the Israeli civilians. They're living in a wartime situation. They have bombs coming in. Unfortunately, the more war that has happened, the more both sides have dug in. I just don't want you to blame the Palestinian civilians because of an election that happened in 2007, and they elected the people that they thought were going to fight back on their behalf. So
that's fine. I'm not trying to blame Palestinian civilians.
Hold on, Destiny.
Okay, because I had like 7 other things you said that I want to respond to, but go ahead.
Okay, hold on. Let me finish. So if you say, because that is a very dangerous line of thought. If you say the Palestinians are all guilty because of an election they had now 16 years ago, that makes the Israelis infinitely more guilty for electing Netanyahu. And I don't want to go in that direction because that leads to terrorism and civilian deaths. Let's just get to the right solution. Now, in terms of why I said...
Wait, let me hold on, real quick. Let me respond to that point, okay? No, that's not dangerous. It's realistic. We have to look at what the people want. When you tell me the Israeli people have Netanyahu as their leader, that's true. And Israel lives in a democracy, and the right elements of that country were gaining a lot of power. That's important to recognize because it shows you what the appetite is for the Israeli people for a negotiated two-state solution. As the terror attacks from Palestinians increase, the appetite for that decreases. So if you wanted to apply the same lens of analysis to the Israeli people as I'm applying to the Palestinian ones, I would say absolutely. I would say in the year 2000, I would say in 93 with Rabin, with Barak, that you did have an appetite for peace, for a negotiated two-state solution. I would say that as the conservative element grows stronger, the Israeli population doesn't support it as much. And you can hold them a bit more responsible depending on who they elect for leadership. That's how democracies work.
But then, wait a minute, that seems like you're advocating for terrorism against Israel.
I'm not advocating for terrorism. I'm saying we have to have an honest conversation about what people on the ground believe and stop walking around like people in America who are like, oh, well, all the Palestinians just want peace and they just want to be blah, blah. No, they don't. They want to fight. All the polling data shows that they want to fight. All of the historical actions show they want to fight. All of the leadership they've had shows that they want to fight. And it makes sense historically for why they want to. We both agree that in 48, they had probably the moral authority to fight. They had it in 67. Maybe they even still had it in 73. To have a people who's had a moral authority to fight for 50 years, to suddenly lose it is pretty hard. But we have to be able to engage honestly with that conversation, because if we walk into, even though what you just said, if we give, here's what you're saying, we give Abbas, we negotiate a two-state solution, which by the way will never happen right now after October 7th, and we give them the 67 borders, which by the way will never happen because Israel's biggest fear is if they show weakness, it means they make concessions, and that's probably what inspired part of the Second Intifada and Hamas, is because after Israel withdrew from Lebanon, after the failure of that 15-year occupation, and they got no peace from Syria, no peace from Lebanon, it energized all of the Palestinians to fight more, because they said, look, when Israel fails militarily, we get more, right? You think that if they negotiate a two-state solution with Abbas is going to walk into the Gaza Strip and fight and take it back? What is that going to be, a Palestinian civil war? And Abbas doesn't even have the popular support for the Palestinians right now. The PA is already seen as this shitty security subcontractor that essentially works at the behest of Israel. If you look historically at both intifadas, there was like 1,000 Palestinian Authority suspected collaborators killed by other Palestinians. The reality is that right now, now, what the Palestinian people want is they want to fight. That is what they want. And that is what has to be addressed and changed. I'm not saying with terror attacks or with violence or whatever, but that sentiment needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere in terms of peace talks.
So, but the Palestinians, Cenk, I'll let you
I've got to address that. So look at these impossible standards and this wild hypocrisy. So the Palestinians are occupied. How dare those sons of bitches fight back? They should just bow their goddamn heads. The Israelis want to keep occupying, keep oppressing, keep killing Palestinians, but they're perfectly innocent. So no one actually says the Palestinians are all doves and no one wants to fight back. They say like someone like me says they shouldn't do the terrorism. It's counterproductive and immoral. But I understand why they're doing it, because that's what happens in every situation where people are oppressed, etc. They try to fight back with whatever little power that they have. That's why the Japanese started doing kamikaze fighters at the end when they were losing. They had less power left, so they would take whatever little power they had and they would drive it to try to knock down and sink American aircraft carriers. Terrorism is an act of powerlessness. So now I'm telling you it's counterproductive. I don't want to go in that direction. But every time we talk about it, you say, no, we can't do peace. After October 7th, we can't end the occupation. That would only reward them. So now you're saying, okay.
What was that? You brought up Japan there. How did Japan get de-radicalized? Yeah, wait, what was the end of Japan's?
Okay, now look, we got to get control here. We got to do one at a time.
But I'm just curious, you brought up Japan. How did Japan stop?
Okay. Sorry,
my bad. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying, let's do what is now an indefinite occupation because you were bad boys. Some of you dared to fight back. You were super bad. So we're going to violently oppress you for a couple of more decades or whenever the indefinite occupation is over. And if you guys are good boys and girls, and even if you politely ask the United Nations for your nation, we're going to slap you across the face and go, don't you dare fight back. And we're going to occupy you indefinitely. But I don't know why you would ever do violence. Meanwhile, on the Israeli side, you have all the power in the world. You're the one that is occupying them. They are not occupying you. You are the one doing exterminating them. They are always like worried. Oh my God, they would kill us all. Yeah, maybe Hamas would, but you're actually killing them all right now. It's not theoretical. We can all see the dead babies. We can all see the dead children and civilians and women. And to have all of that gigantic military might and say, I am never going to stop occupying you. There's nothing you can do, whether it's going to the UN, diplomacy, a peace deal today with the Palestinian Authority, or violence. There's nothing you could do to end this oppression, but I want you to bow your goddamn head and serve me and know that you should be occupied forever. That is not realistic. That is not helpful. That is just one side saying, ha ha, I'm bigger than you. I have more military might than you, and I will oppress you for as long as I like, because if I ever let you be free, like all other human beings on the planet, you are so evil and mean and savage that you might try to kill me, even though I have a military 2,000 times larger than you.
Why did Egypt?
The other side is doing the brutality as we speak.
Yeah, let's get away from the theoretical. What made Egypt sign peace? Hey, yeah, you can let them up.
They were going to get their ass kicked by Israel, and they realized that.
So it was Israel's military might. Why did Jordan sign peace? Why did
Jordan did an amazing job of getting them
to
agree to that?
Egypt signed peace because Israel conquered the entire Sinai and was miles from marching into Cairo. Okay, Jordan signed peace with Israel because they were a military might to be reckoned with. The Abraham Accords worked because Israel has an unbelievable economy and they want to trade and they are not interested in fighting. So as Israel has shown strength to enemies in the region, they have said, you know what, we are going to we are going to allow you to. We are going to allow you to exist, and we're going to sign peace agreements with you, and everything's going to work. So that has historically been what Israel's done, and it has seemed to work for Israel. The Palestinians have not said, we're going to sign peace and come to terms with you. We're just going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting. And it seems to be the case that historically, fighting and fighting and fighting over and over again just doesn't seem to work. That's not a winning strategy. And you say, well, it's impossible for people to sign peace with Israel. They're never going to do it. Do you know how humiliated the entire Arab world was humiliated after 67? And nobody wanted to sign peace. After 67, it was the Khartoum Conference where they signed the 3 no's. They said, no recognition, no peace, no direct negotiations. Israel, we're not going to do anything. And eventually, through their military might, Israel got concessions out of all these people. They gave back the Sinai. They stopped fighting with Jordan, et cetera, et cetera.
That's what I want now.
That's fine, but that started with the other people not fighting anymore. If we were using Cenk logic, we would say, well, of course Egypt wants to fight Israel forever. They need to take back the Sinai. Of course they want to fight Egypt forever. They don't want to give up part of the control of the Suez Canal. They don't want to give up being able to lock Israel out from the Strait of Tiran. They don't want to give up that entire region where Israel was, by the way, moving settlers in, which they did. Almost 5,000 settlers had settled in the Sinai from 67 to 79 before peace was signed, and Israel finally gave the Sinai back to Egypt, and then they demolished all the settler camps and brought them in. So military might has worked historically. Not saying that should always be the case, but I'm just saying that when other countries have shown peace, even though Israel was kind of dominating them militarily, peace was found. Real quick, I'm just running through the rest of these. Real quick. Okay. When you say Netanyahu doesn't want peace, it doesn't matter what Netanyahu wants. Netanyahu is the prime minister of a democracy. The people want peace. He'll be either tossed or he'll change his opinion accordingly. That's what happened when he was prime minister from 95 to 99. Even though Netanyahu is a far-right lunatic, and he absolutely is, and he should be called out as such. No new settlements were built from 95 to 99. The permits issued for houses being built in settlements were dramatically decreased in the West Bank because as much as Netanyahu didn't like it, there was still popular support for carrying through with the Oslo Accords. Now, the Netanyahu of 2020 wouldn't have wanted to act the same way, but he had to because he has democratic pressure. So I don't care if Netanyahu wants peace or not. What matters is what the Israeli people want. And as long as rockets and terrorist attacks continue to pour from the Gaza Strip, that's never going to happen. Real quick on the
you need to give Cenk a chance to respond.
Wait. Well, I didn't even respond to any of the other points. I have to get these out because he brought up so many of these random things. Shoot. Hold on. I got to open my door. 1 second. Oh. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Jesus, real quick. When we talk about 2,000-pound bombs, we talk about the indiscriminate bombing of the Israeli stuff. There are so many random crazy things that are brought up here. We talk about Israel's dropping so many bombs, killing so many people. Israel's dropped 24,000 bombs. Okay, they're killing less than 1 bomb per person. If their goal was to kill civilians, they are the worst bombers in literally the entire world.
Well, does that make a difference how many bombs they've dropped?
Of course, it makes a difference. If you drop 1 bomb and you kill 50,000 people, you're probably trying to kill a lot of people. If you drop 24,000 bombs and your civilian casualties are less than per bomb dropped, it seems like a hard argument to say that they're indiscriminately killing civilians, okay? When we talk about numbers of civilians killed, the numbers aren't important. What's important is the intention. When Israel kills civilians, especially in the course of this war, those civilians are killed as collateral. When Hamas kills civilians, it's because they're targeting them. Hamas's bullets were not accidentally flying into the heads of partygoers looking for IDF soldiers when they breached the walls on October 7th. They were looking to kill civilians, okay? Hamas does not drop pamphlets, make phone calls, knock on roofs, and then wait for an invasion at the behest of the West and the United States to wait for civilians to leave. They just go in and they kill whoever they can find. This idea also of dumb bombs, most bombs are dumb bombs. If you're not firing a guided missile, of course it's a dumb bomb. Just because it's a dumb bomb doesn't mean it's not aimed. You can aim a bomb. Just because it's dumb and it doesn't have a guidance system or any sort of secondary flight system or actual aiming system doesn't mean that it's a dumb bomb. You drop a bomb from a plane, you know about where it's going to go. Again, if you didn't, the civilian casualty toll would probably be a lot higher. The idea they're barely aiming them does not seem to be justified at all. When we say the tunnels are totally unaffected, we've literally seen videos of entire apartment things collapsing with tunnels and shit underneath. Yeah, the tunnels might not have been destroyed as much as they wanted to be. That's why they dropped 2,000-pound bombs. We dropped bunker busters in Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe. It's no surprise that Israel is doing it here to try to destroy tunnels. Every statement that the IDF puts out as propaganda, I guess that's kind of true. You're saying that they should show them capturing Hamas soldiers, but literally every single video or picture Israel puts out either ends up getting re-propagandized. For instance, people say Israel said that there were 40 beheaded babies. Israel never said that. A French reporter incorrectly reported that, and everybody ran with it, and it ended up being not true. Or when you see photos of burned babies, people are saying, oh, well, these are Photoshop. No, they're not. There's no evidence of that. When you got the videos of them walking through that hospital and you see the tunnels and everything afterwards, they go, oh, well, actually, Israel built those tunnels, and there were just a few guns in that hospital, sitting around an MRI machine that hasn't been turned on for months. Even if they put out videos and images, it seems like it doesn't matter anyway. But yeah, okay, that was all the points I wanted to respond to. Go ahead.
Cenk, I think there's a lot to respond to there.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So first of all, you said the decapitated babies was not Israel. That's actually not true. It wasn't an official statement, but it was, I believe it was an IDF soldier that originally mentioned that piece of propaganda, and then Netanyahu's wife repeated it to Biden, and Biden, that idiot, then repeated it as well. So it definitely came from Israel. It's not like the Palestinians were like, oh, we decapitated. No, the Israelis said that. And it was a piece of terrible, terrible propaganda. And I feel terrible because I actually fell for it in the beginning. I was furious at Hamas for what they had done on October 7th, and for many of the reasons that were real, and unfortunately that one as well. So, but the two giant issues here is Look, Destiny, I guess you think it makes sense for you, and I'm sure the people that are on the right-wing Israeli side think it makes sense. But when you all say that Hamas wants to kill civilians, first of all, I agree with that, okay? So they killed a whole bunch of soldiers too, but then they went out of their way to kill civilians. No question about that. We all agree to that. But when you say that Israel has accidentally killed 14 to 19,000 civilians, they're just collateral damage. That's where I don't think you realize that you sound like you're on a different planet. Like, everyone else is looking at that and going, there's no way they're that bad at aiming, that they just have killed a gigantic number of civilians. And now we're at, like I said, about 20 times the number of Palestinian civilians killed as Israeli civilians. So I don't know if 30 times, 40 times, 200 times the number of civilians is going to satisfy anyone, including you. I don't know if you're going to just keep calling them collateral damage. Oops, we killed another 10,000 Palestinian babies, another accident, honest mistake. We were trying to target Hamas in the tunnels, which we didn't get at all. But golly gee, we killed another 14,000 women and children. No, look, I got news for you. No one believes that. Literally no one else other than the hardcore right-wing Israeli side believes that in the whole planet, including in America. And then lastly,
what about Destiny's point about that that Israel have dropped so many bombs, but less than one death per bomb? Does that mean that they're trying to be very accurate?
Yeah, I get it, and it's an interesting point, but it's also an ironic one. Well, we dropped 24,000 bombs in a place the size of Las Vegas, but we didn't, and we killed 19,000 people. But hey, our bombs didn't kill enough. I don't know if it's enough people. Like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Some of the bombs must have landed in areas where no one died. Thank God. But a lot of them landed in areas where people did die. In fact, 19,000 have died. So it's not like they missed. It's not like they did a small number of bombs.
Does it not show that they were trying to be very accurate?
Basically, what they're saying is we dropped a whole heap of bombs where there weren't people, and we dropped a whole heap of bombs where there were people. And I don't think that that's a great defense. So, and then finally, this is maybe the most important part of all this. I'm arguing for peace. I'm saying that if you went and did a deal with the Palestinian Authority, most experts believe that they would be very, very happy to take that deal. And then they would have the credibility to be able to gain control of Gaza and actually run a Palestinian state. The reason why the Palestinian Authority right now is in trouble, does not do elections, is because they have lost credibility, because all they've done is help to occupy the West Bank, and they've gotten nothing in return. They've gotten no concessions. They've gotten no Palestinian state. They haven't gotten the two states. If Israel keeps going in this direction, the Palestinian Authority is going to lose credibility in the West Bank. And then all of a sudden, whether it's Hamas or another terrorist group, they're going to take over the West Bank. And then they're going to stop cooperating with Israel. And then Israel's going to come. And oh my God, I cannot imagine the number of people that they're going to murder in the West Bank. And so if someone like Hamas gets control of the West Bank and they hurt one settler, Israel will come and murder 10, 20, 30, 50,000 people in the West Bank. And then we will have an endless war, endless terrorism, endless chaos and blood, etc. Please, for God's sake, I don't care who started it. Get to peace as soon as humanly possible. But Destiny, when you say we cannot end the occupation because of October 7th, we cannot end it unless we have an impossible standard of wiping out everyone in Hamas, you're saying we're not going to get the peace. We're going to erode Palestinian Authority credibility, and we're going to have a bloody war where the Palestinians are going to be occupied and killed as far as the eye can see.
Okay, so as a first claim, Israel originally claimed, as they were going through houses, that there was a decapitated baby. And then there was a report that 40 baby bodies had been found. And at some point, these two things got conflated in the media, that there were 40 decapitated babies. And I think for some stupid reason, Biden repeated that there were 40 decapitated babies. But the Israeli media never confirmed that original claim. It was reported on CNN. You can see where the IDF, the Israeli media, explicitly said that they cannot confirm. I don't think they confirmed any babies initially. I think it was either a French reporter or somebody else. But so Israel did not originally. We can argue that the reports were wrong, or I mean that the 40 decapitated babies were wrong. That seems to be the case. However, the 40 decapitated babies, that original claim, my understanding is that never came from any Israeli media. I've never seen that substantiated. It seemed to be a mix-up. You can laugh if you want to throw the tweet, if you want to throw the link, or if you want to throw the source for that in chat. I'll easily take the L on that, but you're not going to be able to find it because that didn't happen. Number one. Number two.
I want to agree in part. Can I just real quick?
Go for it.
So Israeli media has actually been great on that, and Haaretz did a terrific job disproving the decapitated baby story. So, and Israeli media often does a good job. And Israeli courts within Israel, not the military courts, sometimes are fair. So I don't want people thinking, oh, there's nothing redeemable in Israel. Oh, Israel's all boogeyman. No, absolutely not. There are interesting parts of the Israeli democracy, and the media did a terrific job there. But Biden didn't get the from the Palestinians. He got it from the Israelis.
I don't even think Biden probably got it from Twitter, and I don't even think Biden said 40 beheaded babies. I think he said he saw pictures of beheaded babies. But again, there's zero evidence that propaganda claim. There's zero evidence that propaganda claim originated from Israel. There's no evidence of that from Israeli media. There is, however, evidence that the original hospital bombing claim, the really big one that drove media arguably for weeks, that Israel had bombed a hospital and destroyed it and 500 plus people had died, that came straight from Hamas. And that was uncritically amplified by almost every mainstream and alternative media outlet across the world. And that was incredibly damning and incredibly damaging on the Israeli side. And it took a long time for people to take a critical look. And there are still people to this day that believes that it's like a 50-50 chance that Israel bombed that hospital, even though one, a hospital is not bombed, and two, there's absolutely zero evidence for that claim. So we want to talk about whose propaganda is doing better on which side. Every single day I'm hearing about another Palestinian killed. I'm hearing about these 3 hostages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was that whole, the JDAM and the hospital bombing thing. That was a huge thing. To argue that Israel is winning the propaganda war, I don't know if I believe that. When you say that Hamas was killing soldiers as well, I think it was 100 soldiers to 1,100 civilians. So if we're going by ratios, Hamas technically did a worse job than Israel. Again, I don't know if I would go by ratios, but
373 soldiers.
Was it 373 soldiers were killed? I thought it was 120. Okay, there might have been a different number on that. Okay, so maybe it might be 300 soldiers to 900 civilians. Okay, but when Hamas sets out to kill people, I don't think they're doing any due diligence trying to figure out who's a civilian or who's a soldier. When I say collateral damage, it sounds like I'm on a different planet. So we can make these emotional appeals over and over again, and we can use the number over and over again. But here are facts. Okay, we know that Hamas operates out of civilian areas. Even Amnesty International limited as much since 2014. We know that there are videos of medical people running and grabbing guns and giving it to Hamas fighters. We can watch those videos on YouTube. We know that Hamas has tunnels that it's built that operate underneath civilian infrastructure. We know that Hamas uses hospitals to bring captured hostages to. We know that Hamas used Al-Shifa as an interrogation site. Again, even Amnesty International and the UN said as much. We know that Hamas has fired rockets out of refugee areas and out of other medical operating areas. We know these things are true. Okay, we know that, and we also know that Israel has been pressured to allow more humanitarian aid in, and they acquiesced to that pressure. We know that Israel gave the northern Gazans warning on when they were supposed to leave, told all of them to evacuate the area before the bombings began. We know that Israel makes phone calls to certain buildings or houses to tell people that you need to leave, and we know that Israel does roof knocks before they bomb these things. Okay, we know every single thing that I just said, and we can fight over any of these you want. These are all undisputed facts that are verified by third-party international orgs, some of which are quite hostile towards Israel. To go through all of that evidence and then to say, well, 18,000 civilians, so they must be indiscriminately targeting. That is a statement uttered without evidence, and it begs for any sort of justification whatsoever. There is none. There's no evidence that any of this exists. It is a fantastic point that's thought up in the West by people that are dealing with no actual facts on the ground of anything that's happening.
Cenk, I think that's a lot to respond to. Yeah.
No, those 19,000 civilians are not dead.
Is that what I said?
I mean, you said that there was no evidence that the 18,000 people had died. I don't know.
I said there's no evidence that they were being indiscriminately targeted or intentionally killed by Israel.
It was all an accident.
Do you think they were intentionally trying to kill civilians?
Oh, definitely.
Then why didn't they kill more? Why only 19,000?
Because they're doing it in a way where they have plausible deniability. Look, I'm sorry, I'm going to do my first insult, but for schmucks like you to go, well, they were moving them and they were being super gentle and they surrounded them with pillows and they warned them, and they killed 20 times as many civilians as Hamas did, but golly, it was all an accident.
Gotcha. And I'll let you do your whole thing. I'm just curious, do you have a single shred of evidence for any of that? That's what I thought. Okay, you can do
No,
your
no,
whole
wait,
thing, but
wait,
you
I
have
don't
no
even
evidence.
understand what
You
you're
have
saying. That's why I laughed.
you have no
Do I have
evidence for the
that
indiscriminate targeting of
19,000
civilians.
people are dead?
Are you just going to keep repeating the number? We can count if you want. We can spend the rest of the room
Wait,
counting
are
up to
you saying they're
90,000.
not civilians? I
I'm
don't
saying they're
understand
not
what evidence you're
indiscriminately
looking for.
targeting civilians. And if you have a single shred of them indiscriminately targeting civilians, I'd like to hear
targeting
it.
civilians,
Yes.
yeah. So my contention is, since they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs, dumb bombs, 29,000 bombs, etc., and they've killed 19,000 people, which are almost all civilians, but even if you take the IDF numbers, over 3/4 are civilians. My contention is that's not an accident. They
Wait a
don't
second,
mind killing the civilians at all.
Cenk, can you respond to what Destiny said? He gave out a list of things saying that because Israel do all of these, therefore they're really trying to take security very seriously.
Yeah, I'm going to address that. But wait, so my contention is they didn't accidentally kill a disproportionate number of civilians. So you're saying your contention is they were trying their damnedest to not kill civilians.
Well, but so the difference is you can say that in a goofy voice, but I gave you evidence of that. Cenk, I gave you evidence of that.
Cenk said you're going to respond to those points of evidence.
Yeah, you can try to put my side in a funny voice. I'm not using a funny voice. I'm saying that Israel allows in humanitarian aid at Western pressure. Israel delayed the invasion to give people time to flee. Israel told everybody in northern Gaza that a military conquest was coming, and Israel does do door knocking, and Israel does call buildings. These are all very strange actions from somebody that is trying to maximize civilian casualties.
Yeah, they're not at all strange. They're exactly what you would do if you wanted plausible deniability as you massacred civilians and committed war crimes.
To actually put leaflets or to tell people to move away? How's that plausible deniability? Isn't that trying to take security very seriously?
Yeah, so in the beginning, when Israel had more brakes in the car, they would actually do the door knocking and the leaflets that you guys mentioned. And then tons of civilians would die, but it was plausible deniability that was not unbelievable, right? And so I remember thinking that's not nearly good enough, but hey, they're trying, right? Now they've gotten to a point, there's no door knocking in Gaza, okay? And leaflets, what difference would it make? They're all squeezed into a tiny little area. Okay, so then now when you look at the actual facts on the ground, Destiny made it seem like it was like a humanitarian thing that they moved them from the north to the south. No, that's called ethnic cleansing and mass relocation. It was actually a hallmark of the Armenian genocide that the Turks moved the Armenians to a place that was safer. Same thing with the Bataan Death March, the Chairlift Tears. All of that ethnic cleansing is the definition of a war crime. You made it seem like it was humanitarian. Then once they got them into the south, then they started bombing the south. There's literally nothing humanitarian about it. It's just one war crime that compounds another war crime. It's not even close. It's the size of Vegas. They moved it to half the size of Vegas, and then they started dropping bombs on the south. It's totally indefensible. I am speaking out against terrorism that is coming from Hamas or any Palestinian side, and I'm also speaking out against what I think is terrorism from the Israeli side, as they kill 20 times the civilians that Hamas did. You, on the other hand, seem to be saying the Palestinians do terrorism wherever they go, and they're terrible, and we have to keep an indefinite occupation. But the Israelis, when they kill disproportionate number of civilians and 20 times the civilians that Palestinians do, are not doing terrorism, are the good guys, and it's all just an accident. And that's why I do the voice, Destiny, because that seems ridiculous and totally not believable.
What else could Israel have done to minimize casualties? I'm curious.
Yes, I have that too.
Okay.
So, and I am not saying this today. I said it on the day of. What they should have done is something that is very hard but doable. Special forces. So it's not going in there and saying, "Hey, Hamas, it's okay that you."
No. We're talking about within how they're doing right now, as far as
Even day of. What is this special forces talking point is brought up over and over and over again. I don't know if it's ironically as the professional video game player. I don't know if people are watching too many movies or video games. You don't send special forces into a densely urban populated area and have 100 soldiers kill 5,000 enemy combatants. That's not how special forces work. Most of the time, these are either serving for highly specialized missions or they're serving in support roles. What do you mean send in special forces to remove Hamas? Can you tell me what that operation looks like?
Yeah, so it would involve some degree of ground invasion. I understand that. And but it would not involve indiscriminate bombings. I'm sorry, the very targeted bombings that just happened to accidentally kill all those tens of thousands of civilians. It would have involved ground invasion, Obviously, you clear some degree of path to get to the tunnels, and then you send people inside the tunnels. Now, that is very dangerous, but that's the whole point of special forces. But if you go inside the tunnels, number one, you get to Hamas much more efficiently. Number two, you might actually rescue the hostages. Instead,
by just sending people into tunnels that the enemy has built and knows the entire layout of and has every control over, you just send random special forces that, what is it, like a nation of Rambos?
Or the hard fighting. You don't want to actually rescue.
It's not about the hard.
You don't want to actually.
It's not about the hard fighting.
You just want to drop bombs because it feels good.
Cenk, has this type of military occupation or operation ever been performed in any part of human history? Are you referencing anything in reality when you talk about utilizing special forces this way, or is this a totally fantastical point that people have invented that has never worked?
First of all, the U.S. fought huge battles inside Iraqi cities, Mosul and otherwise, and those were horrific and deadly. But they did not incinerate Mosul. They did, and there was plenty to blame there in what happened in Mosul. But yes, they spent guys on the ground, including special forces, to get the bad guys.
That wasn't terrible. That wasn't special forces.
It partially worked, and it worked a lot better than dropping 29,000 bombs on Mosul. And remember, in Mosul, we never dropped a bomb over 500 pounds because we thought that was a war crime.
What? We dropped of course we dropped bunker busters in Iraq. Where do we get this idea that we never dropped a heavy bomb?
No, there's a giant difference. Let me clarify. Bunker busters are usually in open spaces. The 500-pound bomb rule, and 500 was a super max. And normally we wouldn't go that high either. And this is New York Times reporting. We would never drop in residential areas. And Gaza's all residential areas.
Okay, so then the bunkers and everything we're looking for are going to be under residential buildings. So what do? Do you just not bomb them? For Mosul, we had air support. We had a military force invading with a full fleet of support. It wasn't just special forces. That's absolutely not true.
No, I just told you that. I said ground forces, just like America had ground forces, and then you send the special forces inside the tunnels. If you say, it's too hard, the IDF can't handle it, they're scared, they don't actually want to fight Hamas, then what are they doing?
Why do you keep saying they're scared? First of all, you're fighting terrorists that are operating out of civilian infrastructure. These are the most cowardly ways you can ever conduct.
No, that's insane.
What's insane? What part of that was insane?
Yeah, the insane standard is, hey, you're all in an open air prison. Some of you are trying to fight back and you're in the tunnels. Oh, because some of you are trying to fight back, I'm going to bomb not the tunnels, but the civilians that aren't fighting back. But because some of you dared to fight back against your occupation, what was Hamas supposed to do? Go build a military complex in the middle of the desert somewhere in Gaza? Well, they would be bombed immediately. So it's an impossible
So they have to listen, if you're going to justify them, if you're going to justify the use of human shields, if you can justify the use of human shields.
That's let me Cenk, are you trying to justify the use of human shields?
No. I reject completely the use of human shields.
That's what you just justified. You said, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to fight actually like a military, or are they supposed to operate out of civilian homes? Like,
no. Okay, listen, guys. First of all, the Israeli Defense Forces uses human shields. There's pictures and video.
Good pivot. No, you're talking about the kid on the back of the truck. This is BS, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's not BS. They put kids in front of them and literally use them as human shields. There is no equivalent in even among the awful Hamas. Instead, Hamas is in Gaza. Gaza is a giant residential area the size of Vegas. And then when you bomb their civilians, you go, well, they're in Gaza. Hamas is in Gaza. And so since they're in Gaza and civilians are in Gaza, they're using human shields. They're making us murder their citizens. They're making us drop 2,000-pound bombs on their citizens. It's Hamas's fault that we had to murder all their civilians. Well, where the hell is Hamas supposed to be? Are they supposed to be in Sweden or Bangkok?
Well, that's where their leadership. That's where their leadership goes when they make millions and millions of dollars and then conduct warfare from overseas. But except it's usually Qatar, Tunisia, or whatever.
According to your guys' logic, Israel is using human shields. They are bombing from Israel, and so what is Hamas supposed to do? They're supposed to come in and bomb and attack and shoot the Israeli civilians because the dastardly IDF is using Israelis as human shields. Why didn't Israel attack from Norway or Budapest?
I must have. It is entirely possible. I do concede. I saw a lot of video footage of the festival. Maybe there were military missile installations around there, and they just didn't show them on camera. But
in Gaza, Destiny.
I'm not. I'm just saying that, like, the idea. I'm saying that because
you have brutalized them for 56 straight years, you're keeping them in an open air prison, and then you go, oh, I can't believe that their fighters are in the same area. They're in the same prison.
Cenk, why do you think Gaza is treated so? Why is Gaza? Why is
dumbest argument on the planet?
Then complain to Amnesty International, because they talk about Hamas using them as well. So does UN Human Rights Watch. Why is Gaza treated so much differently than the West Bank?
The West Bank is helping Israel with the occupation Palestinian Authority. That's why it's on the edge of collapse.
Wait, so I just want to go back.
Fighting back, and I think they're fighting back in an immoral and counterproductive way. But yeah, that's the giant difference.
Wait, so I want to go back to that point about human shields, because it was a really good point. Cenk, can you not agree with Amnesty International that Israel are using human shields? Not Israel, sorry, that Hamas are using human shields.
I do not agree with them. No,
you do not agree.
No, I do not agree, because look, guys, under that same logic, no matter anytime anyone attacks from their own territory that has civilians, then they're using human shields. So if America launches missiles from U.S. bases in America, then the other side would say, oh, you guys are using human shields. I had to nuke all of Kansas, all of Colorado, because you guys were using human shields. You dastardly put your weapons, your nuclear weapons, your missiles in Colorado, thereby forcing me to nuke Colorado. It's America's fault for using human shields. You tell me how that logic doesn't apply.
The logic doesn't apply because we don't fire bombs and rockets from apartment complexes or use hospitals, civilian hospitals, to interrogate hostages.
Military bases, because they're occupied.
Okay, so we think that it's so okay.
So
yeah, I understand. So you're justifying the use of human shields. That's fine. You can justify it. I think that you can actually make arguments there. It's a pretty brave position.
Fury justifies it that Israel is using human shields. You can play at this game all day long.
If Israel was launching attacks from an area,
why are you justifying the human shields that Israel is using? You sound so immoral.
First of all, it doesn't matter if Israel uses human shields or not. The reason why you use
that doesn't matter.
Well, correct. It doesn't matter. Do you know why? Do you know why it doesn't matter? It doesn't matter if Israel uses human shields because Hamas wants to kill civilians anyway. So why would you waste your time, right? If you put a civilian in front of an IDF tank, Hamas goes, "Oh shit, a 2-for-1 special." Obviously, human shields won't work on the Israeli side.
But Israel kills 20 times the civilians that Hamas does. But golly gee, they didn't want to kill them. You see how it's sophistry?
It's not sophistry. It's called collateral damage. This is how warfare works, unfortunately. Sophistry is pretending. Sophistry is having never watched the movie Black Hawk Down and assuming that you could send 20 special forces agents through unknown tunnels and have them beat all the terrorists. That's what sophistry is. Yeah.
Destiny, are you basing you're looking at how the IDF should operate based on video games and movies?
That's what it seems like when people talk about special forces. It's a very video game movie approach. The idea that if you send in some special forces, they can beat a whole bunch of people. But historically, I think there were two really good examples where the United States tried this and it ended in disaster. And Black Hawk movie was one of the movies made about that, where I haven't actually even seen the movie, but that shows that like when special forces got pinned down in a bad area and they had to bring in a ton of support and way more people end up dying as a result of all of this shit because of like what happens. It was Mogadishu, I think was the area it was called. But yeah, you don't just send in unsupported special forces unless it's for very...
I didn't say unsupported.
What?
I didn't say unsupported.
Okay, but no, but when you talk about support, the support is not special forces going in on their own and fighting and killing terrorists. Special forces either work in support roles or they do highly specialized missions. For instance, like flying into Pakistan and killing Osama bin Laden. That would be an example of like a specialized mission that special forces would do. There is no example in the history of all of warfare where special forces go into a city, an enemy city, and kill all the terrorists. That just never happens. So the idea that this is brought up as some serious like pushback on how Israel should be conducting military operations has no basis in reality, has no basis in military operations, has no basis in how any country operates. It's just again, like you said, an impossible standard to hold Israel to. And then to do all of this and to say that like Israel needs to draw a ceasefire or Israel needs to stop the fighting and Hamas should be allowed to stand, or we should give, earlier you were saying we should give more power. Okay, you were saying we should give more power to the Palestinian Authority to go in and clear out Gaza, and now you're telling me that the Palestinian Authority has no legitimacy in the West Bank because you wouldn't answer the question of why is the West Bank treated better than the Gaza Strip, and it's because less terrorism comes from the West Bank than the Gaza Strip, but you don't want to answer that because obviously you would see that the citizens of Gaza have some responsibility for why the blockade exists there. It's just there's like this impossible set of conditions given to Israel where we're unironically telling them to negotiate a peace deal that the Palestinians already walked away from 23 years ago against a group of people that have been shooting rockets into this country every single fucking day for like the past 20 years. It's just like no other country on earth would be held to this standard of negotiation.
You know
it's insane.
Do you know why? Because no other country is occupying 5 million people. Like you occupy them and then you go, can you believe that this one country has these people fighting back when they're prisoners? And they should know that they're prisoners.
So strange that nobody cared when they were being
prisoners.
Crazy that nobody cared when they were being occupied by Egypt and Jordan from 1948 to 1967. Crazy that Resolution 242 from the UN only called for the Palestinian state to be created after Jordan and Egypt lost that territory in a war. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So let's summarize here as we get to the 2-hour mark. So first of all, but before the summary, let me just say one quick thing. Because you misrepresented something I said. I said the Palestinian Authority is losing credibility now because they've not gotten anything through diplomatic solutions. They have not gotten anything by cooperating and coordinating with the Israeli government. So they're on dangerous grounds now of being toppled. I said that they would have enormous credibility and be able to drive out Hamas, which is the only realistic plan to drive out Hamas, if they were able to land a two-state solution and they were the heroes that created Palestine. Then they would have the credibility to rule the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. That's an actual peace plan. But so far, now in summary, you're saying if someone took any of
Wait, don't summarize your position. Don't summarize my position. Summarize your position. I don't think you understand my position.
I'm going to summarize what I think happened in this conversation.
Okay, I'll summarize yours as well after, sure.
If someone were to take your land, you would grab the gun behind you and try to shoot and kill them. Now you say, but the Palestinians, if they do that, they're terrorists and they deserve to be indefinitely occupied. They're terrorists wherever they go. They're violent. It's their fault. They always do the attacking, and they should know their role as prisoners indefinitely under Israeli occupation. But if Israel goes to fight back against October 7th, well, you can't be expected to fight back by doing hard things like going inside the tunnels. So let's just evaporate the civilians instead. Murder tens of thousands of civilians because Israel is not the violent ones. And state violence doesn't count. That violence is just defending yourself. But when the Palestinians defend themselves, terrorists! Now, you would do the same thing, you agreed, but they are not allowed to do it. They are dastardly terrorists, and they should be occupied forever and ever. But Israel can bomb giant residential areas, 29,000 bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. But that is not violence. That is not targeting civilians. That's just, golly gee, I had to do it to clear a path in. So that is as absurd as it can be, and everyone it can recognize it.
Destiny, I think you want to respond to that because I don't think that's probably what you meant.
Yeah, I don't know. Most of the people just don't want to operate in reality because I think that this particular conflict lets us read a lot of like ideological leanings into what should happen. But at the end of the day, nobody actually gives a about the Palestinian people or the Israeli people, which is why all these crazy positions come out.
If you peace.
You obviously you don't want peace. Okay, that's clear. Because nothing that you're saying is rooted in reality. Nothing you're saying has any like bearing with the conditions on the ground.
But your plan is indefinite occupation. How does that get to peace?
Shit. Did I reveal that? Did I say that in this conversation that my goal would be indefinite occupation?
You said after October 7th, we can't do a peace deal right now.
Sorry, you're misunderstanding a prescription for a description. You need to accurately describe what's going on before you can prescribe what ought to happen. The reality is after October 7th, the appetite in Israel for peace is very low. That's just a fact that you have to contend with. Because if you want to create real solutions for people, you've got to meet the people where they're at. That's just how it goes. That's why support for a two-state solution dropped off after the Second Intifada. I'm not saying that's right or it's good. I'm just saying that, of course, as terrorist attacks happen, this is how people respond. Just like how you've said over and over again, and I'm trying to be good faith and charitable when I am confronting you, you're saying over and over again, this is why the people in Gaza are attacking, this is why you're doing terrorists. I hope or I think you're not justifying the attacks, although sometimes it sounds sounds like it. You're just saying that when
You're
do this,
definitely justifying Israel killing those civilians, though. That's
thank you. Nice try, Cenk. Okay. When you're saying this, no, it's literally not. When you're saying that the people are doing this because of the conditions on the ground, I'm merely saying the same thing for Israel. For some reason, ultra far right Zionists can't understand the Palestinian position, and people that simp for Palestinians with no understanding what's going on the ground can't seem to understand Israel's position. You'll say these things over and over again that like, well, wouldn't it be fair that like people in Palestine are really upset because of the military occupation? And then when I say, yeah, of course, but don't you think it's also kind of weird that there are rockets flying in every day? Now there's like 50 million justifications for why that's actually not a big deal and it actually doesn't matter. And that's bizarre to me. My situation, or I'm sorry, I
condemned it.
That's hardly. My solution for this is what needs to happen if you want peace in the Middle East, and anything outside of these boundaries is delusional, okay? Number one, Iran has to come to the table and they need to stop, okay? No more funding shit in Gaza, no more funding shit with Hezbollah, no more funding shit with the Houthis, okay? This has to stop. Iran has to be part of any future conversation.
They have to surrender first. Not only the Palestinians, but the Iranians have to surrender first. This sounds super realistic.
I didn't say surrender. I'm sorry, but no offense, Iran's lost, okay? I'm sorry, they are the losers of the Middle East. Everybody looks at them, everybody laughs. They try to mine the sea to the south of them. They try to shoot shit into Saudi Arabia. But Iran, the Ayatollah is such a loser. Even the people in Iran hate the government. Okay,
how are you going to get Iran? How are you going to get the Iranian government to stop funding Hamas?
In terms of what those talks look like, I imagine there probably needs to be a lot of U.S. leadership. I imagine there probably needs to be Saudi Arabian leadership, and there's probably other Arab states, especially Qatar, that have to be brought in as well. I don't know what concessions need to make in terms of the easing of sanctions, in terms of allowing the UN to investigate potential nuclear reactors. I don't know what all we can offer, but Jesus, in 76 to 79, what we gave Egypt, how many billions of dollars to tell them, listen, stop fighting with Israel. We've done it with Egypt. We've done it with other people. Can't we do it with Iran? It must be possible at some point, right? So one is support from Iran has to stop. And that's number one. That has to be the case. Number two, Israel needs to make a concerted effort towards peace. And this might mean things like you are going to have to grin and bear a couple of terror attacks because they're going to happen. And it can't be the case that every time Israel loses 3 soldiers, they go in and they kill 50 civilians. This has been the history of Israel and Palestine for like 75 that cannot be happening over and over and over again, because obviously it foments hatred on both sides. Okay, so Israel needs to bear it. They need to work towards peace. They need to be willing to make some concessions, like dump some of these enclave settlements. Okay, you have to be willing to dump some of these. You can't continue to expand them because the settlements are obviously severely hamper the peace process. And if you want to keep some of them, when you start to do your land swaps, you need to be willing to offer a lot for places like Hebron. Okay, you can't have these enclaves out here that destroy the continuous state. Okay, on the Palestinian side, okay, there needs to be a hardcore de-radicalization effort. You have to acknowledge that the Palestinian people want violence. Not Hamas, not the PLO, and not just the terrorists, but Palestinians en masse think that fighting will serve their end. That thought needs to be wiped out. That cannot be the case for them thinking that, because as long as they have that idea, same thing with Israel having that idea, as long as that idea exists, peace will never happen. So whether that means the UN stops sending them textbooks and TV shows with Mickey Mouse, the evil Jew, in it, or whether that means there is an effort made by surrounding Arab states to communicate more, whether that means certain types of humanitarian aid are increased, although Gaza is already one of the largest per capita recipients of aid, literally in the entire world, whether that means the easing restrictions on some parts of like the border there from Israel, these are the things that need to happen to slowly work towards some two-state solution. And then hopefully at some point the Palestinian people are willing to elect somebody who's not a boss, because by the way, if a two-state solution ever happens in the future, it's never going to be with a boss. He already lost control of the Gaza Strip once. Why the hell would we give it back to him again? Why would you give him arms and encourage him to go into civil war in the Gaza Strip, assuming that one, he'll even win, and then two, that he'll manage to retain control of it, but he already lost control of it one time. Those are the things that need to happen if you actually want to see a two-state solution come about in the future. Anything else is cope, and I'll fight on any of those points.
Destiny, I want to push in 2 points, and I'll go to Cenk to give him a chance to respond. 2 points. Iranian government and de-radicalization. First of all, Iranian government, you said your whole point of peace, of solution for peace, has to be based in reality. I think what you're saying about pushing the US to work against Iran doesn't seem to be based in reality. I mean, they were going to work on a deal a couple of months ago, so I'm not sure how much that's based in reality. And
So for real quick, so unfortunately in the United States, and this sucks, okay, is that our presidents are 4-year presidents, which is incredibly annoying, or 8-year presidents. So what that means is sometimes, unfortunately, you have to treat the strongest person in the world, sometimes how you would treat a U.S. police officer, you have to treat them like a schizophrenic person that could kill you at any point in time, okay? Because unfortunately, sometimes the U.S. will say things like under Obama, hey, listen, Iran, we're going to unfreeze some assets, we're going to work with you on some shit, and hopefully you guys don't pursue nuclear weapons, let's investigate. And the next president might say, actually, I changed my mind on all of that. The United States, in my opinion, as not being an expert in Iranian history, but in my opinion, the United States has been close at some points to having a peaceful outcome with Iran, and we up for stupid reasons. When George Bush, for whatever reason, decided to throw Iran on the axis of evil, what a stupid decision. And it set us back so far in terms of the progress we've made with Iran. The joint pact of agreement of action or whatever, the Iranian nuclear deal that Obama did was historic. That was amazing. We keep them from pursuing nuclear weapons. We slowly ease the sanctions on their economy. Hopefully the citizens don't hate us as much. And then Trump rolled that back. So I don't think it's impossible that the United States can pursue normalizing some type of relationship with Iran. We just have to not have schizophrenic leadership that is changing deals that we're making every time a new president comes into office, in my opinion.
Okay, so let me push on the next question. But anyway, that was the point to really promote your presidency, Ron. But let me push on the de-radicalization point now. I don't think the people in the Palestinian Authority actually, in their hearts, really want violence. They're in that space in Gaza, and they have their only hope really is Hamas. There is no other feasible hope. Who are they going to hope for? The Israeli government? That doesn't even make sense. In their hearts of hearts, they don't actually want violence. If there were to be another solution of peace, they would probably want that, something reasonable.
I can only go by polling data and what exists on the ground. Now, today, funnily enough, if you look at the support for Hamas or the October 7th attacks, in the Gaza Strip, that has fallen, I think, to around 55%. Now, in the West Bank, I think it's risen up to 80%, but it makes sense why. People in Gaza, after getting, completely bombed and obliterated, and all of their citizens, half of them being, expelled basically from northern Gaza, are like, you know what? The October 7th attacks actually weren't that good. This sucks. Now, the people in the West Bank, the support for the October 7th attacks for them, that has risen to 80%. I'm not trying to say that like Palestinians are inherently violent people. If you want to talk about inherently violent people, you could almost make the same argument for Israel, right? The entire existence of them in that region, whether we're talking about the ear gun that existed, prior to the IDF, whether we're talking about the entire formation of Israel and the territorial expansion, blah, blah, blah. You can make that argument of Israel. I'm just saying we have to understand that right now, Palestinians feel like if we fight, we will win and we'll have a better outcome. That thought needs to be eliminated. They cannot think that, because as long as they think that, why would they push for peace? Like, what's the motivation? If you think fighting is better, why would you try to negotiate with an adversary that you want expelled from the region?
I think we really need to give Cenk a chance to respond to this as well.
Yeah. So look, I'm hoping that this is the final point here, but I thought we were going to end on some degree of agreement, because I agreed with what Destiny said about Israel, right? That they have to stop killing civilians disproportionately and eventually get to popular agreement on pursuing peace instead. And I agree with him on our schizophrenia regarding Iran. I thought Obama did a great Iran deal with Iran, and Trump and Biden have been horrific in getting out of that deal. And I think it's led to more violence and more support for Hamas from Iran, etc. But we have a fundamental disagreement on how to get to peace. So Destiny laid out his idea of you have to de-radicalize the Palestinians first. Hamas has to surrender. Iran has to not surrender, but say we're just magically going to give up every kind of power we have in the Middle East. And the way that they have power, we have nukes, we have overwhelming military. They have these groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, etc., that they fund, and we can call them terrorism, and that's fine. But they're not. So that's, to me, seems enormously unrealistic. Some sort of massive unilateral surrender on one side, and once they are beaten to a complete submission, then we'll come to the peace table. And then if Mahmoud Abbas is not good enough, the guy's been working with the Israelis for 20 years. If that's not a partner for peace, then you're saying there is no partner for peace. Oh, you're going to wait for a magical Mother Teresa to rise up out of a people that have been occupied for 56 years, and they're all going to rally around that Mother Teresa who loves the Israelis with all of her heart, and then we're going to do a peace deal, is basically saying we're not going to do a peace deal. And so my thesis is, no, the peace deal leads to moderation. You want de-radicalization, so do I. But as we showed in the Egypt-Israel peace deal, the de-radicalization comes after the peace deal, not before the peace deal. If you try to put it before the peace deal, it becomes an impossible standard that can never be met. And that's why Dick Cheney, when he said we don't negotiate with evil, when it came to Iran willing to give up their uranium program, he said he wanted them first to completely give up everything they believed in before he would even negotiate with them. He blew it. We could have taken their uranium out. You don't negotiate with angels who have already agreed that they love you. You negotiate with your enemies who hate you. That's why you're in a war. So yes, a lot of Palestinians do not like the Israelis, expecting them to like their occupiers. To say that it's unreasonable is an understatement. Instead, get the two sides who hate each other. And yes, tons of Israelis hate the Palestinians and are voting for people who occupy them, bomb them, kill them, etc. But I don't hold it against Israeli civilians. It's a power dynamic. The powerful do that to the powerless in almost every circumstance. And the powerless usually fight back with water pipes turned into terrible, stupid bombs that barely work. That is the power dynamic. The way to get beyond that dynamic is to get to a peace deal that then de-radicalizes both populations. And we've already done it before in this exact circumstance, Israel, Egypt. That's why doing a peace deal roughly along the 2000 proposal with the Palestinian Authority is the only plausible way to get to peace. Further bombing, further invasion, further war crimes, further occupation is never, ever going to get to a peace deal.
Destiny, do you want to respond, and then we're going to finish off?
I mean, when we talk about massive unilateral surrender on one side, I mean, like the writing is on the wall. Like, Iran has already lost so much influence. They know this. Syria is still like a borderline failed state. Lebanon is barely a country right now. Yemen is, in disarray, right? You're comparing these countries. So, like, do we really expect them to give up to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, even Qatar? Like, come on, like the writing is on the wall. This is a foregone conclusion. We know what the future is going to look like. There is no future where Iran and Syria are leading politics in the Middle East. It's not happening. Ever since Saddam Hussein was gone, like the idea of some Shia power that was going to overthrow everybody else and lead this, we're done. Not only is that gone, everybody else has basically recognized it. And I think Iran is on the way, at least the people are, but we'll see, what that happens in the future, I guess. You talk about like a boss and saying, well, if we can't work with a boss, then blah, blah, blah. Like, the Palestinians don't want a boss. He's incredibly unpopular. They won't even allow a boss to negotiate on their behalf. And to say that de-radicalization comes after a peace deal, I just don't know if that's ever happened in literally all of human history. Somebody talked about de-radicalizing Germany. I think it was that if we just give them what they want, maybe they'll stop invading. I think there was a particular term for that. It might have been called cheese man. I don't remember what it was, but I know that we tried it and it didn't work. We didn't de-radicalize Japan by letting them run shit on their own and infinitely genocide Chinese people and Koreans. We didn't, defeat Italy and Germany by just giving them what they wanted. You have to go in. Sometimes you've got to invade. You've got to be heavy-handed. You've got to do what you need to do. And unfortunately, when you've got a highly radicalized population that's being funded from abroad by a ton of different people to do radical Islamic jihadist attacks, just negotiating peace and saying hopefully everything will go well once we, give them everything is probably not going to be a strong selling point to Israeli citizens that have to live in the shadow of constant attacks from Gaza and a potential nuclear threat from Iran.
Cenk, do you want to respond, or should we finish off?
No, I think our positions are totally clear. And yes, the good people, how we got de-radicalized Japan and Germany? Well, number one, we dropped nukes. I don't know that we want to do that. That was the old bad days. That's why we came up with the concept of war crimes, and we try not to do that. But ultimately, what de-radicalized them wasn't even the nukes. It was that we did the Marshall Plan, and we rebuilt our enemies and turned them into our top allies. That the path of peace and diplomacy is not just one that is more moral, it's one that's more diplomatic, strategic, and intelligent, and has shown success over and over again. The path of war leads to only more war. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate, Eli, for you, organizing this conversation. I hope that people got something out of it. I think they did. And I think you did a great job moderating. And Destiny, I appreciate that we exchange these ideas. And we have to, so that people can learn from it. So
hopefully this was a productive conversation. Thanks, Cenk, and thanks, Destiny. Just at one quick point before we finish. Destiny, would you potentially have a debate with Norman Finkelstein?
If you wanted to, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Cenk. I like shouting at you. You're a fun, energetic guy. So it's always fun, even if we super disagree. And listen, even though I think you're crazy for it, I wish you the best of luck on your presidential campaign. If for no other reason, because I think it'd be awesome to watch you shout at other politicians and stuff. You're always fun to watch, even when I disagree with you. So good luck on everything.
Yeah. By the way, if imagine me in a debate with Biden or Trump. Could be
Be
fun.
a lot of fun. It would be. Yep.
And by the way, guys, thank you for the plug. If you are dissatisfied with our choices being Biden and Trump, you can just give $1 as a form of protest at cenkforamerica.com. Let's get some better alternatives. Thank you, guys.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one, guys.
You too.
Whew, jeez. Okay. I think that was a good rhetoric plus fact combo. I made one mistake, and that was the let's go point by point. I'm never doing that again. When I have people that talk a lot, I'm just going to also talk a lot. I think that's the way to go. Jeez. Thanks for the 1999 donut. Okay, wait, hold on. If you guys are here, and you guys want to do canvassing, we're gonna have canvassing houses set up where we're gonna go do door knocking things, and we're gonna do like a bunch of door knocking, because that's what we do for Democratic candidates and other stuff. I'm linking a thread in all my chats. Mosul was a missed opportunity, a lot of damage to the city and the civilian deaths. Yeah, but not as much as Gaza. But Mosul is hard to compare because, one, you're fighting a standing army with a real leader that you need to depose. I don't think there was, I know that there was some like urban related stuff for Iraq, but I don't think it was at the level of Gaza. One, and then number two, formal army. And two, it wasn't as densely populated, I don't believe. Mosul as all of the Gaza Strip and everything going on there. Like, I think it was too much. The comparisons I don't think are really that great. It was Neville Chamberlain and appeasement. Wait, you know I was making a joke, right? When I said a cheeseman, I was joking. Obviously, I was referring to appeasement, right? Wait, do you think I didn't know what I was referring to? The Iran nuclear deal was terrible. You shouldn't have brought it up. Iran were cheating in the deal the whole time. I've heard people say that over and over again, but every time I've ever dug into it, it seems like the UN investigators were allowed to go into Iran. It seems like they were allowed to investigate what they wanted to investigate. Like there were some disagreements on some things, but the idea that it was overall like like some massive failure, I've just never seen that substantiated outside of just like right-wing talking points. The issue with the deal is that it gave Iran the path to nukes and did not stop their terror activities. Well, the terror activity I don't think was like part of the conversation, but stopping their path to nukes I thought was part of it, which I believe it did, but... What did you mean when you said peace deals don't bring less radicalization? I don't think anybody's ever been encouraged to sign a peace deal with a radicalized partner that's constantly like attacking them with like terrorist shit. I don't think that generally happens. Like I don't think people were talking about peace deals with ISIS or whatever in Syria or Iraq, or peace deals with the Al-Qaeda. I actually appreciated the point-by-point breakdown. Maybe keep them on the notepad during the debates. Also, how do you deal with the frustration when these debates turn into repetitive pro-Hamas memes? I just need to get better at being... I think the key to like winning conversations like this are to have good examples and to be very punchy with your points. Sometimes I worry I go on a little bit too much, but you have to be able to be punchy. Like when he says, what if somebody invaded your house? And I was like, I would fight, but you're not talking about defending my house. You're talking about going and killing somebody living in your great-grandpa's house. Like I think being able to have like punchy responses like that are probably the most important thing to like, yeah. But I honestly, the hardest part about doing debates is thinking of good analogies that are apt and fit and can be punchy. I think it's like the really important thing, but it's hard. Yeah, sometimes I think these on the fly. Sejan. Can you clarify that the sign-up is for the February event Destiny? Yeah, this is the February canvassing event. I'm pretty sure, I know I'll be there. I think there'll probably be other streamers there and stuff too, but... I disagree that going point by point was a mistake. It only became a mistake when you allowed Cenk to interrupt, at which point the debate became a back and forth. Going back to through his points after that was the L. Now, I think going point by point doesn't work because nobody wants to go point by point. They'll just take that opportunity to ramble. When I say point by point, I mean like two sentences for two sentences for two sentences. But when I say point by point, people will say, they interpret that as, okay, you say two sentences and I'm going to do a huge ramble again. And that's, yeah. Do you ever think of analogies beforehand when preparing for debate? Sometimes. Usually just as a result of, arguing with people. You cooked him, not going to lie, but the U.S. did use mostly ground operations in their wars. That's why people say today we lost to the Taliban. The U.S. could have wiped the floor with them, but chose to do it the hard way with tanks and ground troops and limited air support to limit civilian deaths. That could be true, but I've never heard that in my entire life. I'm pretty sure there are wars or conflicts that we've won with like exclusively air support. Wasn't Libya done exclusively in Bosnia, I think? Weren't both of those things done exclusively through air fighting? And then usually when we've got military troops that are going on the ground, like for Iraq, we're doing air. Air is always leading the attacks into when we go to the next country, no? Yeah, so the idea that like we predominantly rely on ground support with no air operations, when I'm pretty sure, like, or even historically, we look at Israel in the 6-Day War. The reason why they won the 6-Day War is because they destroyed all of the enemy airplanes before the war technically began, right? Or kind of, yeah. Cenk leaves out a lot of your statement a lot of the time to make it seem like they're wrong. Did you notice? Yeah, people do that, yeah, but... Why didn't you push more on the fact that a lot of what he said sounded very conspiratorial, that it was just based on his narrative? I kind of did that. Usually when I start asking people for facts, that's what I do, but that's like a hard one because it might make me sound overly aggressive. But I tried that at the point. I was like, okay, wait, you're saying that Israel is bombing people indiscriminately. What do you have to support that? Give me one fact, an actual fact, like a non-narrative or a non-story thing. And yeah. Kicked ass against the strawman factory. His points were garbage. Did not engage with any of your points. Hamas fight in civilian garb. I was going to go over that too, because he's saying that they just, but they I'm pretty sure they work and move amongst civilians. The Al-Shifa hospital is a thing that Amnesty International, I keep going back to Amnesty International and the UN Human Rights Watch because people like to cite these guys when they're against Israel, so we can cite them when they're against Hamas too, right? The peace and rebuilding of Germany only came after Nazi unconditional surrendering and de-radicalization. Yeah, I was going to bring that up because he brought up the Marshall Plan, and it's like, bro, we put U.S. bases all over Japan. Like, how many U.S. bases are throughout Europe? Like, if that's what you want to go by as a standard, that's fine. But the Marshall Plan was not just, we're going to completely pull out and let you guys run everything on your own and then ship you unlimited money. That's like, but I didn't want to, that would be reopening that whole conversation, you know? Can't believe he straight up said Israel targeted 28,000 civilians intentionally. Yeah, and there's even the thing that I don't like about the indiscriminate argument is there's even better arguments you can use. Like you can argue, for instance, that Israel is too careless with civilian casualties, that Israel does not do proper calculations for collateral damage, that Israel does need to ensure or provide, for instance, public information or at least info to the United States proving that this was a consequential military target that justifies the death of 100 or 200 civilians. There are arguments that you can make that Israel, but none of those are ever made. Usually the other side just says, oh, they're just bombing people to kill civilians. Really? Okay. Do you have any evidence of that? No? Okay, well. Also, we de-radicalized Japan after indiscriminate civilian bombing and military occupation where we disarmed the Japanese and banned elements of their culture we found too aggressive. I don't know about the culture thing. I know that, I'm pretty sure that happened in Germany, but yeah, Japan was what was it, some 27 plus huge cities were basically annihilated. I don't even know what people in Japan were doing after these bombings. There was Jesus Christ. Who is the moderator and how does he have so much clout? I don't know who that guy is. He emailed me to set up debates and I was like, okay, sure. Thoughts on Hamas being freedom fighters and not terrorists? I mean, you can call them freedom fighters, you can call them terrorists. It's all the same. These words mean whatever you want them to mean. One man's freedom fighters, another man's terrorists. I'm not really too hung up on the terms that people use. It's whatever. What did you think of the moderator? I thought he did a decent job. But Cenk also did a decent job too. And I think I did an okay job. Yeah. We weren't screaming at each other too much. Netanyahu always won by a narrow margin. Hamas won 70+% of the votes. The reason there were so many election cycles in Israel is because we don't all support him. I don't remember what the actual vote total was for Hamas. I just know that for the seats of that parliament, it was 44 to 42, I think, for Hamas versus Fatah. But I don't know what the actual percentage votes of the civilian population was. Martin Anderson, have you seen any of the takes by the Ayn Rand Institute on the Israel-Palestine conflict? No, they might be good, they might be bad, but I tend to avoid any libertarian analysis of literally anything. Well, Japan and Germany seem like horrible arguments for Israel-Palestine. The people we integrated into post-war Japanese politics. Israel would never touch the equivalents of these people for Palestinian groups. Nobusuke Kishi literally headed the slave factory system in Manchukuo and was a notorious sex slave enjoyer. He then founded the LDP. Would Israel integrate Hamas leadership into a post-war government? I have no idea. Although that's probably the way to go, right, Irk? Because wasn't that the big mistake in Iraq, that we didn't integrate any of the prior Baathists into the government and we banned all of them and just brought in completely new people? As shitty as it is to have older people that were part of the enemy involved in the government, maybe that's like a necessary part of having a functional post-war state. I don't know. I completely agree, but Israel would never. Oh, maybe. I mean, you could bully them too. I don't know. Maybe not. I'm not sure.
The bombings didn't stop with
we just
they continued
dropped
for the next 5 months until
You got him with the wall shotgun? Yeah, I don't know about that. I think a point you need to hammer more is that every time Israel gave concessions in the past, it got more violence in return. The Oslo agreements, the Gaza disengagement, and even pre-October 7th Gaza restriction liftings. I would say that that's not true. The Oslo agreements technically brought about the end of the first intifada. So saying that when Israel gave that concession, also there weren't really, I don't know if I would say there were concessions made in the Oslo agreements. That was just mainly centering on the formation of the Palestinian Authority and then the slow transference of security over to them. I wouldn't say that there were any concessions probably made that I'm aware of in the Oslo agreements from Israel to Palestine. The Gaza disengagement was done, but I think that's because Israel was fearing basically demographic issues, and I think they wanted to focus more on the West Bank. I don't think that the Gaza disengagement was like some good faith thing that was done in order to like win support of the Palestinian people. And I think that was under Sherrod, and I think he even said as much. They were just trying to shore up their demographic powers in other parts of Israel. Because they did it unilaterally. They didn't like negotiate anything for it. They're like, oh, we're just gonna pull our summons out, fuck you guys. Although a lot of people that lived there were hella mad. Yeah. I mentioned this earlier, but you should look into the history leading up to the establishment of the Kosovo state. What do you think is the realistic solution to the Israel-Gaza situation? I already said I get my points about what happened. I think that the thing is, I just don't know if people actually care that much to like have the support in politics to actually do something about it. I don't think that the support right now that Americans have for, at least for Palestine, is very strong. They go out and they march for it, but I don't know if they'd give a lot for it. And I don't even know that much how we even care politically about Israel, because I think we have like hardcore Iraqi syndrome. And now we're also supporting Ukraine and Russia. I don't think there's a huge push from the American people to also get heavily involved in Israeli politics. Like negotiating anything with Iran, I just don't see that as being very popular right now. I don't even know we want to. I'm not sure what like Biden's foreign policy initiative is with regards to Iran. I'm sure that other states in the Middle East might be interested in it, but it's my feeling on it. I don't have a strong like justification for that. These are just the vibes I get. You understand what canvassing is for viewers? So canvassing is we're all basically going to go to wait, fuck. Where is Sejin? He should be in here talking about this. God damn it. I can ask him questions. How did you feel your debate with Cenk would go? I had no idea, actually. I think Cenk was actually a lot more calm than everybody thought he would be. Or at least I thought he would be. People were saying that he was going to, like, explode and be screaming all the time. I think Cenk was actually pretty... Obviously, I disagree with him, but he wasn't, like, unhinged or anything. Can you clarify? Do you think your solution is at all likely? I feel like they confuse you saying that the only solution with the point that it is likely everyone will agree to it at the end of the day in peaceful. I think my solution is, I've given this take before. I didn't give it there because Cenk would have exploded on me. I've said this before and I'll say this again. I think the issue that you have right now is both sides believe that if they continue to fight, they'll win, but the Palestinians are wrong. And until they realize that, I don't see how we move towards any sort of peace agreement, unless Israel like takes it upon itself to be more gracious than I would ever expect any country to be. Like, why would Israel, like if Israel has everything to gain by continuing the conflict and continuing the settlements and continuing everything, then why the fuck would Israel do anything else besides continue to do that and continue to fight? Like, yeah. History of USA from World War II to modern day to prepare for the tankies and America bad crowd. That might actually be interesting. Like a Cold War arc, maybe. How are they wrong? You got to explain. Well, I think as Palestinians continue to fight, it's just worse and worse for them. So it's not good. Oh, Sejin. Where are we going to go canvas at?
Ohio District 1.
Ohio District 1.
Yeah, that's around Cincinnati. Congressional District 1.
That's going to be so much fun. Sell it to us. Why would I want to go knock on doors? Why the fuck should I even care?
One, because it's super fun and based, right? You actually get to walk around, touch grass, meet a bunch of DGGers, do something for democracy. Think about all the virtue signaling you could do. And then you also get to like have fun at the like community night events where you hang out with a bunch of DGGers that aren't unhinged because they actually came. We usually have the more sane people at these events because normal unhinged people don't do this thing. It's pretty based. Play games. If you're old enough, go drink with your buddies at a bar or something. It's good times. Oh, this person's asking why Ohio? Is that even at play for president or House? One, the priority is the Senate seat. This Senate seat is make or break for the Democrats, right? Ohio District 1 is heavy Democrat. The reason we're doing this is one, we have a really interesting data strategy to target new voters instead of just the typical voter file that we use. We're going to be using like some consumer data to actually like guide strategic vision to get new voters. So like we'll look at how people behave online, and then we'll try to talk to those people. If you're online, like you're generally a Democrat online, but you don't vote, that's who we'll be focusing on. And then the reason we're doing Ohio this early is because, let's be honest, everyone is super pessimistic on this race. It's going to be super close.
Are we really all pessimistic?
Huh?
Are we really pessimistic?
Democrats on this Senate seat? Yeah. I feel like I talked to people about this Senate seat and everyone's like, oh, fuck, it's pretty much lost already. But that's not true. And we have an opportunity to sort of like turn that narrative around. Right?
Maybe.
I feel like a really big problem that we've been having this election is like self-fulfilling prophecies.
Okay.
Like the whole like Biden thing.
Yeah.
There's like everyone keeps saying Biden's too old, to the point where like if you say it enough, obviously everyone's gonna think it. Mm-hmm. But like he's been a really effective president so far.
Somebody asked, or Axel asked, I get your point of the de-radicalization of Palestinians, but won't the end of the occupation greatly help that process? How do you disagree with this? First of all, there's zero evidence for this working, number one. That if you just suddenly hand over the entire Gaza Strip to a militant Islamic Sunni group, that all of a sudden there's zero evidence. There's no reason to even believe that would work, number one. And number two, I think there's probably circumstantial evidence to believe the contrary, that it seems like when people win things through violence, especially like separatist groups or whatever, then the goal seems to be more violence. Whereas when people win things through peace, it seems to be that there is peace, right? So for instance, when I feel like it's been said a lot, I guess it's hard. I guess I haven't looked for explicit proof of this. Maybe I should look at this. But I've heard it been said a lot that one of the things that incentivizes Palestinians, especially Hamas specifically, to fight is the motivation from Israel leaving Lebanon in 2000 and the failures that they had there, or the failures of, or not the failures, but basically the violence of the Second Intifada, that these types of things, when people see that it kind of works, it's kind of successful, they're getting a lot of, at the very least, they're shaking Israel. It encourages more violence. So the idea that you give the Gaza Strip to all of the Palestinians after October 7th, why wouldn't that just motivate more violence? Like, holy shit, we did October 7th. We actually got this land freed. Well, fuck, let's keep doing terror attacks. Maybe we can get some of the settlements kicked out, right? That idea of like you reward people for terrorist acts, I think only drives further terrorism. The idea that would bring about like a huge like decrease in attacks, I just don't think there's any reason to believe that. I don't see why I would ever think that would be the case. Sure, I can agree, but in the minds of Palestinians, it's violence that has worked. In their minds, Israel left Gaza because of the Hamas attacks. Same thing with what happened in Lebanon. What good has come from diplomacy? Occupation hasn't ended. Well, this is where we disagree. I would say the Palestinians have never honestly tried diplomacy. I think that hasn't been, I don't think that's been legitimately tried yet. But I mean, obviously we disagree there. Well, actually, I don't even know we disagree, because you agree that Arafat was a piece of shit and never seemed to operate honestly. So I don't agree that that's been tried yet, but who knows? That Israeli human shielding was crazy. Our military bases are far away from civilian areas, and the ones that aren't are not being fought out of. Yeah, I know, that's a weird thing. Also, process is widely regarded in Israel as the biggest concession we made. It marks the start of the peace process with the Palestinians and the land for peace paradigm. Most chunks of lands were withdrawn because of it, which eventually led to the Second Intifada. Yeah, sure, I understand what you're saying, Flack, but I'm saying, like, Israel didn't actually make any solid concessions for Oslo, right? Israel didn't agree on what percentage of the 67 borders or West Bank would be held. Israel didn't make any solid agreements agreements on what would happen with East Jerusalem. Israel didn't make any solid agreements on what the security situation would look like afterwards. Israel didn't make, like, there were no real solid agreements to make. I understand it was historic. It was a big step. I think the Oslo Accords were good. I think it was a step in a good direction. But to say that Israel made big concessions, I just don't agree with that. Yeah. Ask him D's, good one. Do you think if the West forces Ukraine to give up its territories in exchange for peace, it will incentivize Russia for more aggression? I mean, maybe, but I mean, at some point you have to figure out what you're going to do. I mean, like, Russia's already incentivized for aggression, right? They were successful in Georgia. Yeah, it sucks, but Palestinians didn't walk away from the Clinton parameters or Taba, yet you keep repeating that claim. We do agree. I don't think you've ever convincingly argued the other side of this. I believe that the Palestinians walked away from Taba and the Clinton parameters, and I think they walked away from the Camp David Accords. I don't think there was ever a good faith attempt to negotiate at either of these. I think that there was an attempt to wait for a change in the U.S. administration. I believe that was stated as much, that Arafat was hoping to talk to Bush and get more out of him than he did with Clinton. That was a gamble that failed. I don't agree that a good faith effort was made for the Clinton parameters, for the Taba summit, or for Camp David. That's my feelings. But when we should talk about an actual Israeli mainstream opinion, there are plenty of Israeli right-wingers who are very nuanced and represent their actual side. I think it's so important that you don't create an echo chamber of foreigners or leftists. Maybe at some point. I don't know. Israel pulled negotiators in Taba. That's a fact. Wait, a fact? Link me where? What? My understanding is that Taba basically ended with both sides not being able to reach an agreement, but agreeing to make a public statement that they were closer than they ever have been. But if Israel did pull negotiators in Taba, that might have happened. That eventually they pull. Oh no, I'm sorry. That did happen at the end of Taba. But by then, and this is Arafat's fault, by then Barak's term was coming to an end. It was too late. Taba was too late. Camp David was the last chance. The Clinton parameters in Taba were probably too late because Clinton was leaving office and Ehud Barak was leaving office, and Arafat knew that. This wasn't a mystery to the rest of the world. That was known, and that was planned, and that was designed by Arafat. Attention DGG canvassers, one and all. We're excited to announce our first canvassing weekend of action. The 2024 year, we need your support and attendance to make it the largest canvassing event in the country. Oh, it probably will be, I would imagine, for a single canvassing event. Absolutely. Also questions from KickChat. Somebody said, can Sedgwick explain more how they vet for places to canvass? And then, what do you think about targeting voters who have become disillusioned with Biden and our canvassing efforts? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so if you want to talk about how we're targeting people, so obviously there are your people in the voter file. These are people that vote Democrat, or sorry, they tell the Democratic Party usually that they're voting their way. Through like canvassing and polling exit data and stuff like that. And you can talk to these people, and that's traditionally how you interact with voters through canvassing. But we have the opportunity now, after the age of big data, what we can do now is we can take your consumer data, so basically like all your cookies and stuff, we can see like, hey, this guy is a Democrat, but they're not on the list. And then we can go talk to you and see if you're registered to vote, who you're likely to vote for, what you're thinking about. We're going to do a lot of research in the first weeks of the House being there, just so we can like get an idea of what people are thinking it, and then target our messaging to specifically target the people that lean Democrat but don't necessarily identify it, so that we're what we're calling expanding the voter universe. This is usually the strategy that people have early in the election, is you want to increase the amount of people you can appeal to, and then you want to rally them all up, and then you get them out to vote. Those are like the 3 steps.
Okay, you can argue the Clinton parameters in Taba were too late, although not even Israel negotiators would agree with that. Of course they would. What do you mean? We were literally on the eve of Barak's fucking election. Unless they were both ready to agree to something like right there, like it wouldn't happen. Not that Arafat walked away. There are no sources to support the claim that Arafat... How is Israel pulling negotiators at Taba due to their elections? Arafat's fault. Arafat knew elections were coming up. It was literally stated that he thought that if he waited for the next election cycle in the United States, that he could get more from Bush. Like, Arafat was literally telling people this. He went to Bush and he talked to him, and he was waiting for the next election cycle because he wanted to get more than he got at Camp David. Like, it's Arafat's fault that it got pushed so late. If he wanted to negotiate something with Israel, he could have done it, but he chose not to. It's also true that the Gaza disengagement was unilateral, and the intentions behind it weren't exactly to make peace, but fact of the matter is, it lifted all restrictions to occupation of any sort from the Strip, and Israel got Hamas in return. That's an insanely strong argument, I think. I mean, yeah, kind of, but it's pretty shitty that happened, sure. Sign up link progress.win/Ohio Canvas. Who? You and your fellow DGGer. Your fellow DGG canvasser Destiny, the DGG Canvas pilot team, Progressive Victory, and other political communities with some special guest appearances, so keep tuned in for announcements. Winky smiley face. Ordinary orientation. When? The weekend of February 10th and 11th, Saturday and Sunday, where Cincinnati, Ohio, Congressional District 1. What? Voter registration ahead of the Ohio primary registration date. Ohio is going to be a difficult Senate race this year, and Democrats are already pessimistic despite it being a very close race where we hold an incumbent advantage. Don't let the party give up hope for control over the Senate. Triple exclamation mark. Rally up, Ohio, and change the narrative. Why? This event is the first of many that we've done in partnership between Destiny and Progressive Victory, and is the chance for us to get a head start and really shake up the Democratic establishment and show them that we are a force to be reckoned with. In order to make that happen, we're looking to bring out over 500 DGGers and other political activists in Ohio District 1 for a single weekend to have quite possibly the largest voter registration drive over any 2-day period in state history. If this excites you, or if you want to dip your feet into real political electoralism or action, or you just want an excuse to canvass some doors and hang out with your fellow DGGers in person, we want you to come out. As part of this effort, and like all past DGG canvassing events, we'll be coordinating carpools from across the country, providing discounted/free hotel spaces for those in need of financial assistance, as well as lunch for everyone in conjunction with fun activities in the evening. It'll also be an opportunity to meet some of your stream favorites, including the big man himself. Not that big man. Wait, who's not that big man?
That's Biden.
Oh. Do not miss the opportunity to make history and be part of this political movement. FAQ, do I need prior political experience? Absolutely not. We'll be providing training for you for your first shift. What should I bring? Warm clothes, lots of water, your phone, and a positive attitude. If I want to help but live far away, what can I do? Donating to the cause, link, get involved in phone banking, or join the Progressive Victory Discord to find local action near you. Where should I look for an update? On this Reddit post and on the dedicated Discord. Link will be sent to your email in a couple days after this post is up. I can't make that date. Is this the only event in 2024? No, absolutely not. Not only will we be holding multiple other large events of a similar scale throughout the year, but we are looking for other ways to get people involved, or other ways for people to get involved. Wow. Sejin talked about the odds of setting up a canvassing operation in Gaza. I've done a lot of deep canvassing in the tunnels.
Good one.
Can we request for the hotel to also be segregated by race? Good job, Zoom. Honestly, the Ukraine part is where I disagree. Russia has violated countless agreements. Any decision where you leave Russia unpunished is a guarantee for the next war, possibly even against a NATO country. It'll never be against a NATO country. I agree that it sucks, but I mean, at some point we need an off-ramp, right? That's what people were talking about for a year. Are we doing, is this mainly the thing we're doing? Is it like voter drive, like to get people signed up for voting? Is that what we're mainly focusing on for this thing?
Yeah, it's voter registration. So
Gotcha.
the deadline to register to vote in February is the 20-something. So it had to be before then. And then the reason we're focusing on the primary is because, one, we need to change the narrative that Ohio is a lost cause. And then two, it's just a really good event it's like a central location. It's a good place to start. So